Chapter 291. Not long after dinner, Mo Xiaoyao's face gradually became ugly. Yi Li quickly asked Shenyang to come over. Shenyang was silent for a long time and only said one word, endure. The side effects of using the phoenix tail grass were incurable and could only be endured by himself. Li, go rest in the side hall. Seeing Yi Li's stiff face, Mo Xiaoyao said softly. It would not look good when it flared up. He did not want to be too embarrassed in front of her and did not want to scare her. Yi Li calmly sat by his side and firmly said, I'll accompany you, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Mo Xiaoyao could not help but want to laugh, but his heart wanted to cry even more. 8 or 9 years, countless times he was on the brink of death. Countless times he was in so much pain that he could not find a reason to continue living. No one had ever asked him if he was afraid or not. No matter how powerful the Dingguo prince was, he was only a person. Moreover, when he was injured, he was only an 18-year-old youth. Of course he was afraid. Every time the cold poison flared up, he was afraid that he would never wake up again. He was afraid that the Dingguo household would be destroyed. He was afraid that no one would be able to avenge his brother, his own, and the tens of thousands of Mahist army soldiers. But he could not show his fear in front of anyone. He could only endure. But now, his Li, his wife, was sitting by his side and telling him not to be afraid. Okay, don't be afraid. Holding Yi Li's hand, Mo Xiaoyao said with a faint smile. Yi Li almost did not want to think about how this day and night passed. In the beginning, Mo Xiaoyao's pain was still bearable. She sat by his side and talked to him to distract him. But after midnight, the pain suddenly intensified. Even a tough person like Mo Xiaoyao was in so much pain that his entire body was trembling. He could not even speak a complete sentence. Any pain-killing drugs or acupuncture needles would be completely ineffective. Yi Li could only watch as he tore the brocade quilt on the bed and pulled down the brocade canopy on the bed due to the intense pain. Yi Li finally couldn't hold back her tears when she saw the usually calm and elegant man's painful and fragile appearance. She had never hated her own powerlessness so much. She vowed that she would accompany him through this pain, but in fact, there was nothing she could do except watch him and prevent him from seriously injuring himself. In just one short night, Yi Li finally understood what it meant to drag on like a year. When Mo Xiaoyao fainted from the prolonged pain, she could only carefully let him lean on her body. She didn't even dare to touch him. He could only hope that he would have a short break before the next wave of pain hit him. As expected, less than an hour later, Mo Xiaoyao woke up. What followed was an even more intense pain than before. This repeated fainting and waking up from pain and then fainting continued until noon the next day before it gradually subsided. When Chief Steward Mo and Shenyang opened the door after noon, they saw the mess in the room. Wang Fei was sitting on the ground next to the bed, her back leaning against the bed as she slept with an exhausted expression. In front of Wang Fei, the prince's head was resting on Wang Fei's lap. Even though he was not sleeping well, it could be seen that he had already fallen asleep. The wounds on his body and hands had already been treated. Seeing this scene, the two men who were almost 100 years old together couldn't help but sigh sadly. Shenyang waved his hand and left the room with Chief Steward Mo. Having just experienced a full moon, Mo Xiaoyao was once again lying on the bed. This caused Yi Li, who was already worried about Mo Xiaoyao's health, to feel even heavier in Yi Li's heart. Li, what are you thinking about? Mo Xiaoyao lay on the bed and smiled as he looked at Yi Li, who was holding a book in a daze. Yi Li raised her head to look at him and said with a frown, Can your body travel thousands of miles to the northern militant army? Mo Xiaoyao smiled, It's only one night a month. It's much better than before. If it was like last year, I'm afraid it really wouldn't work. Right now, my body is no different from a normal person's. Why can't it? Yi Li shook her head. This time, she had been by Mo Xiaoyao's side the entire time. The process had been shocking to her. That kind of heart-wrenching pain was something that even someone like her who had undergone professional torture training would not be able to endure. Furthermore, Mo Xiaoyao's body was not good to begin with. What was even more frightening was that he had to endure this kind of pain once a month. Just this kind of psychological shadow was enough to drive a person crazy. Looking at Yi Li's worried and distressed expression, Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly. He reached out and pulled Yi Li to his side and laughed softly. I once thought that I would never be able to get up in this lifetime. But look at me now. Aren't I fine? So what if I have to suffer this pain once a month? I think it's worth it. Li, I hope that your husband is perfect. Only then can he be worthy of my Li. Mo Xiaoyao murmured as his slender fingers touched Yi Li's beautiful lips. Yi Li turned her head away, not allowing herself to look at the wounds on his hand that had not yet healed. She held back the tears in her eyes and said, even if your leg can never recover, I will not despise you. Compared to those so-called healthy young talents, Yi Li could confidently say that Mo Xiaoyao was much more outstanding than any of them. She had never thought that Mo Xiaoyao had to do anything to be worthy of her. I know, but I hope that Li has the best. Mo Xiaoyao said with a gentle smile. Yi Li was taken aback. She couldn't help but tear up. What if you spoil her? Mo Xiaoyao trapped her in his arms. As long as Li wants it, as long as Xiaoyao has it, I can give it to you. Even if I don't steal it, I will steal it for you. The storm of the betrothal was forgotten by the Ding King's Fu and the northern militants' embassy. The capital was still bustling and busy as usual. It was just that there was an additional name of the Ding country's Wang Fei. Although the noblewomen secretly discussed with contempt and ridicule, who could deny that there was more envy and jealousy? Yi Li did not pay attention to the outside world. Every day, she just took care of the affairs of the Ding King's Fu as usual. When she had time, she would secretly go out of the city to see the people in training. In the blink of an eye, it was already the day for the princess to set off. The day before the departure, the husband and wife who were about to separate did not have time to be alone together. The secret study of the Ding King's Fu was rarely full of people. When Mo Xiaoyao stepped into the study with Yi Li, everyone was slightly taken aback before they hurriedly stood up to greet. Mo Xiaoyao waved his hand and said, there's no need for unnecessary formalities. Li, you know most of these people. You can also meet the rest. Yi Li calmly sat beside Mo Xiaoyao and nodded with a smile. Looking around, she was familiar with the people present such as Chief Steward Mo, Feng San, Leng Haoyu, and a few others. There were a few others that she did not recognize. She turned her head to look at Mo Xiaoyao in confusion. Mo Xiaoyao said with a faint smile, this is General Zhang Qilan. He is in charge of the Mahist army near the capital. This is Sun Yan. He is the commander of the Black Cloud Cavalry. Mo Hua. Mo Xiaoyao introduced the two middle-aged men who looked extraordinary and called out a name in a low voice. A gray-clothed man suddenly jumped down from the beam and respectfully bowed his head, Prince Ding, Princess. Mo Xiaoyao looked at Yi Li and smiled, this is Mo Hua, the commander of the Shadow Guard. Yi Li nodded and smiled at the three people. These three people were the trusted aides who controlled the true power of the Ding King's Fu. Especially Mo Hua. After entering the Prince Ding mansion for more than a year, Yi Li naturally knew that those surnamed Mo in the Ding King's Fu were the most trusted people of Mo Xiaoyao. They were people who had been loyal to the Ding King's Fu for generations when Mo Xiaoyao was still alive. Chapter 292. Zhang Qilan and Sun Yan quickly stood up and said, this subordinate greets Princess. Yi Li smiled and said, we are all on the same side, there is no need for the two generals to be so courteous. Feng Zhiyao and Leng Haoyu, who were sitting at the side, looked at each other and saw a trace of surprise and affirmation in each other's eyes. After everyone sat down again, Mo Hua turned invisible and disappeared from the study room. Yi Li looked at a certain shadow in the study room and smiled faintly. Mo Hua had a faint dissatisfaction or unwillingness to accept her, but this was not a problem that needed to be solved now. Prince, the northern militant kingdom is far away and it will take a few months to reach there. Isn't it inappropriate for the prince to go alone? Zhang Qilan was a soldier and was a straightforward person. He said whatever was on his mind. The others nodded their heads, although they knew that the decision could not be changed. Sun Yan suggested, Prince, should we ask the emperor to allow the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry to escort the princess and prince to the northern militant kingdom? Everyone present agreed. The northern militant kingdom and the Ding kingdom had a blood feud. They would not be at ease if the prince went to the northern militant kingdom alone. Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly and said, the emperor will not agree. Not to mention the emperor, even the northern militant kingdom will not agree. Sending the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry to escort the political marriage team might not even be able to enter the borders of the northern militant kingdom. The northern militant kingdom's enmity towards the Mahist army was not lower than the Mahist army towards the northern militant kingdom. Leng Haoyu smiled and said, everyone need not be too worried. I think the northern militant kingdom will not have the guts to directly attack the prince. The Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry will definitely not be able to go, but no one will say anything if we bring a few shadow guards. As for how many they will bring, it was up to them to decide. The discussion in the study paused and everyone turned to look at Mo Xiaoyao. Although the Ding King's residence had been very low-key all these years, it was indeed the prince who had dragged his sickly body and single-handedly restored the Ding King's residence that was on the verge of collapse. They should believe that since the prince had promised the emperor to go to the northern tribes, he must have a plan in his heart. Mo Xiaoyao held Yi Li's hand and smiled, since I am heading to the northern tribes, I have a plan. What we should worry about now is what will happen in the capital after I leave. Everyone was stunned. Feng Zhiyao frowned and said, Prince suspects that someone will attack the Prince Ding mansion after you leave. Mo Xiaoyao said indifferently, it wasn't easy for I to get away from the capital. It would be difficult for the other party to not make a move. After I leave the capital, everyone will listen to Wang Fei's orders. Everyone present was stunned. They couldn't help but look at the quiet woman sitting beside Mo Xiaoyao. Although they admired Wang Fei's performance in the past year, for a 16-year-old woman to control the entire Ding King's residence, people still doubted her ability. Sun Yan frowned and said, Prince, you mean? Mo Xiaoyao didn't immediately answer his question. Instead, he looked at Yi Li and smiled, Li, is the jade pendant I gave you a few days ago still with you? Yi Li was stunned. She then remembered what Mo Xiaoyao was referring to. Lowering her head, she took out a jade pendant from her sleeve and opened it. Everyone looked at it and couldn't help but gasp. In Yi Li's palm was a piece of high-quality mutton fat white jade. That jade wasn't suitable for a woman to use, so Yi Li usually kept it with her and didn't wear it. On the jade pendant, there was a lifelike Yazi carved on it. Yazi, the second son of the dragon, with the head of a dragon and the body of a wolf. Its personality was strong, brave, good at fighting, and bloodthirsty. However, this was the true commander's seal of the Ding King's residence. The Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry were the same. They didn't have a common commander seal. Of all the armies, only Prince Ding could move at will. However, there was one exception. That was the Ding country Wang Fei, who held the Yazi jade pendant. Her power was no different than Prince Ding himself. Because of this, the world always thought that Princess Ding could also move the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry. In reality, there were only one or two Princess Ding who had this power. The reason was that the other Princess Ding didn't have this jade pendant. Prince Wang Fei is too young. Is it? Zhang Qilan said worriedly. The other people didn't speak, but the same thought was written on their faces. Wang Fei did have outstanding abilities. If she could train for a few years, she might be able to hold her own. However, the current Wang Fei, you are only 16 years old. You have only been in the residence for a year. It really made people worried. Feng Zhiyao stood up with a smile. He bowed to Yili and said, Feng Zhiyao will follow Prince's orders. I will listen to Wang Fei's orders. Leng Haoyu raised an eyebrow slightly. He followed Feng Zhiyao and said, I will follow Wang Fei's orders. Feng San, Leng Er, you. Zhang Qilan stared anxiously at the two young people who didn't know the severity of the situation. Feng Zhiyao leisurely fanned himself and said with a smile, General Zhang worries too much. Wang Fei's literary and military skills are extraordinary. This year, in Yonglin City, she only used 20 to 30,000 soldiers to stop King Li's army of 100,000. She also killed tens of thousands of enemies and even completely destroyed King Li's two flanking armies. Who dares to say that Wang Fei doesn't know the art of war? Zhang Qilan stilled. He naturally heard about Wang Fei defending Yongzhou. However, he didn't take it seriously. After all, Murong Shen was still in Yongzhou and Wang Fei was just a woman. Since ancient times, there was no precedent of a woman on the battlefield. He only thought that Wang Fei and the Black Cloud Cavalry were in Yonglin, so she ordered the Black Cloud Cavalry to help defend the city. However, it was completely different when he heard Feng Zhiyao say it personally. Feng Zhiyao had been in charge of the Shadow Guard for many years. It was impossible for him to speak carelessly. The generals who led the troops looked at Yili with a trace of inquiry. They were usually in the barracks and didn't have much interaction with Yili. Naturally, they didn't know as much as Feng Zhiyao, Leng Haoyu, and the others. At this moment, when they heard Feng Zhiyao's words, they started to doubt whether Prince's decision was too abrupt. Yili put away the jade pendant again. She raised her head and smiled at the generals. This consort is young and inexperienced. In the future, please give me more pointers. Her tone was light and calm as usual, but the generals could acutely feel the sharpness and murderous intent. Those who hadn't been on the battlefield wouldn't have such an aura. This young Wang Fei could even completely restrain this murderous aura. If she didn't do it on purpose, others wouldn't be able to feel it at all. It was as if the woman in front of them was as harmless as they saw her. The generals' hearts trembled and they all lowered their heads. We will obey Wang Fei's orders. Mo Xiaoyao looked at the crowd with satisfaction and nodded, very good. After I leave the capital, everything in the Ding King's Fu will be decided by Wang Fei. Wang Fei's words are I's meaning. Do you understand? This subordinate understands. The crowd said in unison. The secret conversation in the study continued until late at night. After sending everyone off, the two walked out of the study hand in hand and saw a crescent moon in the sky. Yili raised her head to look at the handsome man beside her. Her heart couldn't help but move. A feeling of reluctance spread in her heart. Li, what is it? Mo Xiaoyao asked in a light voice. Yili shook her head and shook off the gloom in her heart. I'm worried about you going to the northern tribes. I've picked a few people for you to take with you to the northern tribes. Chapter 293. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and asked curiously, what kind of people can make Miss Li feel so assured? Is there some kind of genius that I don't know about? Yili sighed softly and said, if possible, I don't want to give them to you, because they haven't finished their training and tests. But this time, the emperor definitely won't let you bring too many people from the Prince Ding mansion. The number of guards you have is limited. It's better to bring them along. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, since Miss Li is so confident, then I also want to see the results of Miss Li in the past month. Yili smiled faintly and raised her hand to tap lightly twice. Mo Xiaoyao looked around attentively. His eyes flashed and he said loudly, Shadow Guard, alert. In the night, after a few light sounds, everything returned to silence. Not long after, several figures landed from the trees, from the walls, and from the eaves. They quickly formed a line and said in a low voice, Gongzi, please instruct us. Yili raised her eyebrows in surprise and said with a smile, to be able to recognize me, it seems that Lin Han and the others have taught me well. Prince, how is it? Mo Xiaoyao shook his head helplessly and said, "It seems that the shadow guard needs to be trained again." These people didn't seem to be very skilled in martial arts, but they were able to silently sneak into the heavily guarded Prince Ding mansion and defeat enemies twice their size. It had to be said that their abilities were shocking. Perhaps the shadow guard of the Prince Ding mansion had been too arrogant these past few years. Yi Li smiled and said, "Prince, there's no need to feel depressed. They were able to sneak in because they knew about the guards of the mansion. The guards of the Prince Ding mansion didn't have too many loopholes." Mo Xiaoyao said, "Li doesn't need to comfort I won't blame them. Where are the guards in the courtyard?" A moment later, a dozen shadow guards walked in with their faces covered in dirt. Among them, the shadow guards were so ashamed that they did not dare to raise their heads. They boasted that they were the most powerful guards in the Ding King's residence, but they were caught unprepared under their watch without a sound. If it was really a sneak attack by the enemy, and something happened to the prince and princess consort, even 10,000 deaths would not be enough to atone for their crimes. Mo Xiaoyao looked curiously at the 8 people standing in front of him. He felt that these people were completely different from the Mahist army's Black Cloud Cavalry and the Shadow Guard. But he knew that these people were truly chosen from these 3 troops. In less than 2 months, they were able to change so much. It had to be said that his beloved consort really knew how to train people. "Li, they shouldn't only know how to sneak attack, right?" Yi Li raised her head and said proudly, "Of course not." Without using any internal energy, just in terms of close combat, each of them can easily fight against 15 elite soldiers. Each of them can skillfully use all kinds of weapons. No matter if it is one-on-one, group attack, night battle, water battle, assassination, ambush, night attack, it is not a problem. As for what else they know, you can tell it to the prince. The soldiers standing in a line started from the first one. Reporting to the prince, this subordinate was originally from the Mahist army. "I am good at assassination and ambush." This subordinate also knows the northern tribes and southern Zhao languages. This subordinate was originally from the Black Cloud Cavalry. "I am good at archery and close combat." This subordinate was originally from the Shadow Guard. "I am good at disguise, qinggong, and poison." After listening to their reports, even Mo Xiaoyao could not help but sigh in admiration. "Li is truly amazing. Are these people really for me?" Yi Li glanced at him and said unhappily, "Otherwise, could it be that I took them out to make you jealous?" After saying this, she did not care about Mo Xiaoyao's reaction. She looked at the people in the courtyard and said, "You are the most outstanding soldiers in the first batch of training. Almost all of you have completed the training ahead of time. Originally, you had a month to learn more skills and then take the test. But now you have to carry out the mission ahead of time. I am very sorry." The leader of the soldiers said, "It is our honor to serve the prince and princess. Princess, please give the order." Yi Li nodded and said, "Very good. From today onwards, you will be the prince's personal bodyguards until the prince returns from the northern tribes. So, your first mission will be to protect him. The goal is to see the prince return to the capital in one piece. Can you do it?" "Yes, we swear to complete the mission," everyone said in unison. Yi Li smiled and said, "Very good. This is not only a mission, but also a test for you. Because it is your first mission, I will send Lin Han to accompany you. He is not only your leader, but also the person who will test you. Everyone, have a safe journey." "Thank you, young master." Outside the palace, Princess Ronghua was wearing a red wedding dress with a phoenix and a peony. She tearfully said goodbye to the Empress Dowager and the Emperor-Empress. Princess Xiaoren, who used to be arrogant, finally could not help but cry in the face of her only daughter marrying to the northern tribes. She looked at her daughter who was about to leave but could not say anything. Now it was the Empress Dowager and the Emperor and the Empress who came to send off the princess. Even if she was the biological mother, she could not hold Princess Ronghua back. Princess Ronghua said goodbye to the Empress Dowager, the Emperor, the Empress and her parents one by one. She was supported by the palace maid who accompanied her to the carriage. When she was about to get on the carriage, she looked back in the direction of Yili. Yili nodded gently and smiled at her. Princess Ronghua looked down and smiled faintly. She resolutely turned and stepped into the carriage. On the luxuriously decorated carriage, the peony curtain embroidered with the noble status of the princess fell gently, covering Princess Ronghua's beautiful face and figure. From now on, she would live in a foreign country as the princess of Dechu state. Perhaps she would never see her parents again. Li, I am leaving. Be careful in the capital. Standing beside Yili, Mo Xiaoyao whispered softly. Yili looked up at the elegant man in a dark green robe embroidered with a silver dragon. She nodded gently and said, I know. You be careful too. Come back early. Mo Xiaoyao nodded. I will be careful. Li is alone in the capital. Yili interrupted him and said firmly, I will guard the Prince Ding mansion well and wait for you to come back. Mo Xiaoyao stilled and said in a low voice, as long as Li is safe, Xiaoyao will be very happy. The attendant on the side carefully came over to urge them to leave. He muttered in his heart that it was said that Prince Ding and Wang Fei had a good relationship. Now it seemed that they were inseparable. Yili took a step back and left Mo Xiaoyao's arms. She tilted her head and said to Lin Han standing on the side, Lin Han, the prince's safety is in your hands. Lin Han nodded and said seriously, Wang Fei, please do not worry. This subordinate will not betray Wang Fei's trust. Yili nodded and said goodbye to Mo Xiaoyao before retreating into the crowd. Mo Xiaoyao turned back to look at her. He led the white horse beside him and mounted it to catch up with the procession that had already left. When the entire procession had disappeared into the distance, Princess Zhaoren finally fell to the ground in tears. Zhaoyang Princess ordered people to help her back to the Princess Fu. The Emperor and Empress also accompanied the Empress Dowager back to the palace. The noisy palace gates instantly became much quieter. Yili stood where she was and looked in the direction that Mo Xiaoyao had left in. She was silent. Wang Fei, Prince Ding has already left the city. We should return. Chief Steward Mo walked in front of Yili and said in a low voice. Yili nodded and said, let's return. Mo Xiaoyao's sudden absence in Jing seemed to be lonely and bored. Chapter 294. After Prince Ding left the capital, the Ding King's residence closed its doors and declined all visitors as usual. However, only the people in the Ding King's residence knew. In just a short span of 10 days, the number of secret attacks on the Ding King's residence was several times more than the past few years. In the middle of the night, another wave of attacks ended. Yili sat on the chair placed under the eaves and looked indifferently at the men in black who were kneeling on the ground in the courtyard with a solemn expression. On her left and right stood Zhuo Jing, Qin Feng, Chief Steward Mo, Feng Zhiyao, Mo Hua, Zhang Qilan and Han Mingxi who were specially stationed in the residence because Prince Ding had left the capital. Other than Feng Zhiyao who was smiling as usual, the rest had an ugly expression on their faces. Tonight, the assassins actually broke through the outer perimeter of the Ding King's residence and almost barged into the main courtyard where Yili lived. As the leader of the Shadow Guards, Mo Hua's expression was even uglier. This was simply a slap to the Shadow Guard's face. Alright, tell me, where did these people come from? Yili looked at her subordinates' gloomy expressions and asked indifferently. The assassins who were forced to kneel in the courtyard had a flash of disdain in their eyes as they arrogantly tilted their heads to one side. Yili laughed in spite of herself, it was my slip of the tongue. If I don't ask properly, I don't think you will confess. However, it just so happens that, in these 10 days, there were a total of 7 waves of people who came here. Among them, there might be some of your companions. However, there isn't anyone who is strong enough to go against me. Qin Feng, I'll leave it to you. Qin Feng laughed loudly, many thanks to Princess. It just so happens that my subordinates are learning how to interrogate. These few days, they have improved tremendously. I still have to thank so many people for their contributions. Feng Zhiyao, who was standing by the side, sneered and pretended to be disdainful, but his eyes were already looking at Qin Feng. This young master requests to be a spectator. He, Feng Zhiyao, was known as the most powerful interrogation expert in the Ding King's residence. However, ever since Qin Feng brought back those few brats, he then realized what was called there was always someone better than you. Moreover, these interrogation experts were mass-produced. Qin Feng looked at him with a fake smile and said, "This is a secret. Outsiders are not allowed to enter." With a wave of his hand, someone came over and stopped the people in the courtyard. Feng Zhiyao glared resentfully at Qin Feng, who had left in a carefree manner. Then, he turned around and looked at Yili eagerly. There was no other way. Ever since Qin Feng followed Wang Fei, no one could speak in front of him except for the prince and Wang Fei. Yili faintly smiled and said, "Feng-san, Qin Feng didn't deliberately make things difficult for you. This is really confidential." Feng Zhiyao harumphed and said, "It's just an interrogation. Even if they have some unique methods, it can't be considered a secret." Yili smiled and said, "The interrogator is still a secret for now." Feng-san rubbed his nose and didn't speak. He was one of Mo Xiuyao's most trusted people. Naturally, he knew that Wang Fei had a secret troop of people selected from the various armies of the Ding Wang Fu. No one knew what Wang Fei wanted these people to do. Even the prince didn't know what happened to these people after they were selected by Wang Fei. Now, was it these people? Feng Zhiyao thought of the people that Qin Feng had brought back a few days ago to be interrogated. He had only taken a hurried glance. There didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary. However, Feng Zhiyao's wariness that had been cultivated after so many years on the battlefield and in secret made him feel that these people weren't simple. Yili stood and smiled to the crowd. "It has been hard on everyone tonight. Let's go sit in the study." Zhang Qilan's expression was ugly as he said, "The prince just left and these people made a move against the Prince Ding mansion. Are we just going to let it go like this?" Yili faintly smiled and said, "General Zhang, don't worry. Naturally, we won't let it go like this. Ben Fei just happens to need some people to practice." Her gentle tone brought out a chilling murderous intent. Everyone couldn't help but be solemn as they followed Yili to the study room. When they returned to the study and sat down, Yili said to Han Mingxi sitting on the side, "It's time to take care of Xiling and Nanjiang. Mingxi, leave Jing tomorrow." Hearing this, Han Mingxi frowned and wanted to say something. Yili shook her head and said, "No need to say more. You have seen the situation in Jing. There's nothing for you to do here. It's better to leave early. Dagu should still be in Yongzhou right now. If there's anything you can't decide, you can take my token to ask him." Han Mingxi looked coolly at her and sighed softly, "I know. I will leave tomorrow. I'm going back to pack first." Yili didn't keep him and just nodded. When Han Mingxi left, the atmosphere in the study immediately warmed up. It wasn't that the people of the Prince Ding mansion didn't trust Han Mingxi and were wary of him, but these people were all born with a pair of astute eyes that could see through the world. Han Mingxi's thoughts were hidden but could not be hidden from these people. But these people were also very loyal to Mo Xiuyao. Even if there was nothing between Wang Fei and Han Mingxi, in the eyes of these loyal officials of the Prince Ding mansion, they couldn't help but be colder to Han Mingxi. Yili acted as if she didn't see the expressions on everyone's faces as she continued to talk about what happened in the prince's mansion. Everyone was worried about the safety of the Prince Ding mansion. Chief Steward Mo asked, "Wang Fei, should we send more shadow guard into the Fu?" These days, the Prince Ding mansion had been attacked continuously. The guards and shadow guard were probably exhausted. Today, assassins had even broken into Wang Fei's residence. Yili smiled and said, "There's no need to be so troublesome. They worked so hard to sneak into Jing and even risked their lives to break into the Ding Wang Fu that the world knows is impregnable. We have to see what they want to do. Starting tomorrow, catch fewer assassins. Let a few go back. Feng Zhiyao's eyes flashed and he said with a smile, Wang Fei wants to let people know that the Ding Wang Fu's defenses are gradually weakened. Will the other side believe it? Yili smiled and said, since they know they can't break in but still come wave after wave, this Fei will give them a chance. If it was you, would you believe it? Zhang Qilan said worriedly, if this news spreads out, the Wang Fu will be even more unsettled. Yili smiled coldly and said faintly, this Fei will let the world know that the Ding Wang Fu is not only impregnable, it is also a hell on earth with no return. Everyone's heart shook as they stared blankly at the gentle and beautiful green-clothed woman in front of them. They were speechless for a long time. Wang Fei. Qin Feng pushed the door open and entered with a strange expression. Yili raised her eyebrows and asked without surprise, you didn't get anything out of them? Qin Feng said with slight anger, one committed suicide and the rest are just small fries. They don't know anything. Yili shook her head and said, that's not right. The one who died was not the leader. Qin Feng looked at Yili in confusion. Yili said faintly, it's impossible for the other party to not know how powerful the interrogation at the Prince Ding mansion is. If they really wanted to die, they would have killed themselves when they were caught. In terms of experience, you are not as good as Feng San. Feng Zhiyao looked at Qin Feng proudly and said with a smile, that's right. At least in this young master's hands, there will never be a case of a prisoner committing suicide. At this time, Qin Feng did not care about Feng Zhiyao's provocation. His sword-like eyebrows were tightly knitted as he said, Princess Consort means that the one who committed suicide was just a cover for the real leader. Yili held her chin and said, there is at least a 50% chance. Of course, it is also possible that he was frightened by your methods and coincidentally fell into the hands of a few inexperienced rookies and took advantage of the opportunity to commit suicide. But, your methods should not have reached that stage, right? Chapter 295. Qin Feng said with some vexation, those brats just learned this and did not know how to control their strength. If they really died. Yili lowered her eyes and said softly, we don't lack time now. Let's change the method and take it slow. Change the method? Yili said, training the eagle. Training the eagle? Yili played with the white porcelain cup in her hand and said softly, light the prison cell until it is as bright as day. Don't use torture anymore. The people in the prison cell will take turns to watch them and change shifts every 2 hours. There is only one point. Don't let me see anyone sleeping until they are willing to speak the truth. Feng Zhiyao asked in confusion, it's just not sleeping. Is there any use? Yili smiled, young Master Feng San may have tried not sleeping for 1 or 2 days, but has he tried not sleeping for 4 or 5 days? With this method, even the proudest eagle can be tamed, let alone a human. Although Feng Zhiyao had his doubts towards Yili's words, Qin Feng did not hesitate to accept it completely. He immediately turned around and gave the order. Feng Zhiyao turned back to look at Yili and said, these few days, does Princess Consort have any thoughts towards these assassins? Yili turned back and Zhuo Jing handed over a file. Yili opened it and said, these few days, there are all kinds of people who have broken into the residence. There are people who have been hired to kill, people who have come to seek revenge and people who have come to loot a burning house. Loot a burning house? Who has the guts to loot a burning house in the Prince Ding mansion? Mo Hua, who rarely spoke, said with ridicule. Feng Zhiyao smiled, no one knows if it is really looting a burning house or not. But in these few days, so many lawless people have suddenly appeared in the capital. Are the people stationed in the capital and the capital's magistrate doing nothing? Chief Steward Mo said in a deep voice, the Ding Palace has been attacked repeatedly. Even if the Prince Ding mansion is huge and there are not many manors around, it is impossible for that person in the palace to not know. But after so many days, no one from the palace has come to ask. It's as if nothing has happened. Yili rubbed her forehead and smiled sweetly. That person in the palace probably wants to know how powerful the Prince Ding mansion is. Feng San, send the news out tomorrow. This consort has been frightened for days and is not feeling well. Frightened? Feng Zhiyao looked strangely at Yili's face. Whether it was Ding Princess Consort or those unlucky assassins that had been frightened these past few days was still debatable. Yili glanced at him. What? This consort can't be frightened? This consort is still a woman, and His Highness is not by my side. So what if the assassins are frightened when they come to our door? Feng Zhiyao rubbed his nose and said respectfully, no, Princess Consort is too frightened and her body is not in good condition. Yili snorted, very good, let them be happy for these few days. This consort is frightened and will not see anyone. That's all. Chief Steward Mo hesitated and asked, if the palace summons you, Yili smiled, you are seriously ill and cannot enter the palace. As for the imperial physicians and rewards sent by the palace, they could just accept them. Don't agree to anything else. This old servant understands. Chief Steward Mo nodded. After dismissing everyone, Yili left the study room alone and walked towards the bedroom. She raised her head and looked at the almost full moon and sighed worriedly. She turned her head towards a certain place in the darkness and asked, why are you following me? Mo Hua's stiff voice came from the darkness. The prince said that he will protect Princess Consort's safety. Yili smiled faintly and ignored him as she turned back to the room. After she was far away, Mo Hua walked out of the shadows and exposed himself to the moonlight. There was clear anger and defeat in his eyes. His ability to hide was not as good as Princess Consort. Princess Consort. In the study, Yili put down the chess piece in her hand and raised her head to look at Qin Feng at the door. What is it? Qin Feng said, the assassins confessed. Mo Hua's eyes lit up as he sat across from Yili. He also put down the chess piece and stared fixedly at Qin Feng. Qin Feng smiled and said, Princess Consort's method is effective. Yesterday at noon, some of the assassins couldn't take it. But the leader of the assassins only confessed now. Yili nodded in satisfaction. She put away the chess pieces and the board as she said, bring him over, and bring the confessions of these people as well. Qin Feng nodded and left. Not long later, a man with a haggard and exhausted face was escorted in by 2 guards on the left and right. Just by looking at the man's bloodshot eyes and his vigilant gaze as he stared at Yili, it could be seen that this person had reached his limit. After not eating, drinking, or sleeping for several days, this person was extremely weak both physically and mentally. Even if she let him out, he would immediately fall asleep outside the gates of the Ding King's Fu. Looking with a smile at the man who was forced to kneel on the ground, Yili said with a faint smile, I haven't seen you for a few days. Are you well? The man's bloodshot eyes looked like they were about to spit out fire as he stared fixedly at the green-clothed woman in front of him. Yili did not care at all. She played with the jade bracelet on her wrist and sighed softly, you don't have to look at me like this. I had no choice but to use this method to deal with you. My prince is not here. You have so many people bullying a weak woman like me. It's not honorable, right? The man's spirit was already dispirited. At this time, he was still able to raise his spirit to glare at Yili. It was enough to show that he was tough enough. Unfortunately, it had no effect on Yili. Very quickly, he gave up and asked in a hoarse voice, what do you want? Yili slowly withdrew her smile and said sternly, tell me who is the mastermind behind this. I've already said it. Yili sneered. She casually threw the confession in her hand onto the table and said with a smile, in terms of making false confessions, I'm afraid you can't be called an expert. Shuo Jing. And San nodded and said, this subordinate understands. The interrogation and intelligence analysis lessons will be doubled. Yili nodded with satisfaction and glanced at the man on the ground, you still don't want to say it? Then go back and rest. Don't worry, I won't take your life. Let him rest for an hour before starting the interrogation again. Hearing Yi Li's words, the man's face finally changed. Qin Feng frowned and said, if we let him rest and start again, will it affect the results? Yi Li smiled and said, an hour. Don't worry. I believe that after a short rest, this one will be able to understand the wonders of this kind of interrogation. No, I'll talk. The man's face was ashen. Yi Li said, very good. Who sent you? Don't tell me it's the one from the palace. Even though you've just confessed, it's not like your subordinates don't know anything. The leader of the third-ranked assassin organization in the Jianghu, Night Kill. The man's face changed. He looked weakly at Yi Li and hissed, Wang Fei is truly resourceful. Yi Li smiled and took it as an answer to his flattery. She raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, answer. The man said, I also don't know who the other person is. But from the appearance and accent, he seems to be from Xiling. Yi Li thought for a moment and asked, where else did he contact you? Chapter 296. The man said, Yi Sha is in the south, near Yongzhou. When the other party came to find us, Prince Ding had not yet left the capital, so we did not plan on taking this job. However, the other party vowed that Prince Ding would definitely leave the capital within a month. Therefore, they offered a large sum of money to invite us to infiltrate the capital. If Prince Ding had not left the capital, we would not make a move. 10 days ago, Prince Ding had indeed left the capital. We observed for another 10 days and found that the assassins did not know about Yi Sha. Therefore, we decided to make a move. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, very good. Where is your leader? The man was startled and looked at Yi Li in astonishment. Yi Li faintly said, you guys were able to observe for 10 days before taking action. This consort doesn't believe that the assassins from a few days ago didn't return. This consort doesn't believe that you guys didn't properly assess the strength of the Ding Palace. Knowing that it is impossible to do it, yet you still did it. That can only mean that you are not the true leader of Yi Sha, right? Seeing the man lower his head and not speak, Yi Li did not mind. She grabbed a piece of paper from the table and wrote for a while before raising her head and handing it to Qin Feng, take him down and ask him according to what is written. If you still can't get anything out of him, then there is no need to bring him back. This consort does not have that much patience. Qin Feng glanced at the paper in his hand and waved his hand at the guard before taking him out. Mo Hua looked at Yi Li and said, Wang Fei already knew that he was not the true leader. Since that is the case, why waste time on him? Yi Li smiled helplessly and said, although he is only a scout, we really do not know where the rest of Yi Sha are, right? I feel that, if we can't find these people quickly, we will be in big trouble. Mo Hua gritted her teeth and said, even if that person in the palace is not involved, he definitely knows about these people's plan. The Shadow Guard has been obstructed in their search for the past few days, it is definitely that person's doing. Yi Li calmly said, has the Shadow Guard reached the point where they can be easily obstructed by the palace guards? Mo Hua's face was ashen, unable to say anything for a long time. After a long time, he gritted his teeth and said, I don't know what the princess consort has in mind. Yi Li shrugged and said with a smile, I don't have any great moves. I'm just going to deal with all changes by sticking to the status quo. Half an hour later, Qin Feng delivered the assassin's confession again. The expression on his face was even more austere than before. Yi Li was not in a hurry to look at the confession and asked, is he dead? Qin Feng shook his head and said, not dead, he fainted. Yi Li nodded and lowered her head to look at the confession in her hand. A cold smile gradually appeared on her lips, very good. She raised her hand and handed the confession to Mo Hua and Zhuo Jing. The two looked at it and their expressions became heavy. Mo Hua stood and said, this subordinate will immediately call all the Shadow Guard near the capital back to the Fu Stop. Yi Li said calmly. Mo Hua turned around and glared at Yi Li with some anger. Princess, all the people have already joined forces to attack the Wang Fu. Once they come in, I will make sure they don't return. Yi Li said with a cold smile. Mo Hua stilled, as if frightened by Yi Li's unrestrained killing intent. She frowned and said, even though the Wang Fu is heavily guarded, it is impossible to guard against so many experts at the same time. It is not just princess's safety, but also many important places in the Fu. Yi Li's smile was warm, but it made the people who heard it feel a chill in their bones. Don't worry. Send someone to tell General Sun to lead the Black Cloud Cavalry to guard all the exits in and out of the capital. Once the assassins escape, kill them without mercy. The Shadow Guard will be stationed in all parts of the capital. Once they find someone escaping, kill them. Also, if the Shadow Guard near the Prince Ding mansion sees the situation in the Fu, immediately surround the king's mansion. No one can enter, no one can leave. This subordinate obeys, Qin Feng and Zhuo Jing said respectfully. Mo Hua looked at the two and also acknowledged. Yi Li nodded and said to Qin Feng, let out all of your people to train. Their first mission is codenamed Extermination. Qin Feng nodded excitedly and said, this subordinate understands. This subordinate will not disappoint Princess's trust. Yi Li waved her hand to dismiss the three of them. She raised her head to look at the bright sunlight outside the window and couldn't help but sigh. In a short span of 10 days, the king's mansion had turned into a sea of blood. But, no matter what, she had to protect this mansion. This was not only a grand king's mansion, but it was also her home. Ever since Prince Ding left the capital, the nobles in the capital could clearly feel the gloomy atmosphere of an impending storm. Not everyone was kept in the dark about the continuous attacks on the king's mansion. After all, the commotion caused by the killings was not small. But there was no indication from the palace, so people could somewhat understand the thoughts of that person in the palace. But occasionally, there would be a faint uneasiness in their hearts. It was good that nothing happened to the king's mansion. If something really happened, Prince Ding's return would be a very troublesome matter. A few days later, there was news that Princess Ding had been frightened and was bedridden. Even the summons from the palace were all rejected. The king's mansion closed its doors to visitors, so no matter if it was those who were worried or those who wanted to inquire about the news, there was no way to know the real news of the king's consort. Many people also secretly believed the rumor that Princess Ding was seriously ill. After all, she was a teenage girl. No matter how powerful she was, without Prince Ding by her side, even a normal man would not be able to withstand the continuous assassination attempts for 10 days, let alone a girl. Princess, Lord Su from the Imperial Censor's mansion requests an audience. Director Mo respectfully reported. The brush in Yi Li's hand paused and she faintly said, I won't see him. Please ask Lord Su to return. When my body recovers, I will go to the Imperial Censor's mansion to pay my respects to uncle and aunt another day. Director Mo hesitated for a moment and said, Lord Su is very insistent. He also said that if Princess insists on not seeing him, he will immediately enter the palace to meet the Emperor and recount the recent assassination attempts on the king's mansion. In reality, it wasn't that no one had reported this matter to the Emperor, but all the memorials had been kept by the Emperor and not sent out, completely treating it as if there was no such matter. Some of these people were hindered by the Emperor's intentions, some were secretly appeased by people from the Prince Ding mansion. So even though the assassination attempt on the Prince Ding mansion was an open secret, but on the surface, everyone still accompanied the Emperor and acted as if they did not know. Yi Li was silent for a moment and finally said, invite uncle in. Su Hongyan followed Director Mo in. Director Mo excused himself at the door and invited him to enter the study alone. Yi Li put down the brush and stood to greet, Uncle, why have you come? Su Hongyan glared at her in exasperation and said, if I didn't come, I would have left you in the Prince Ding mansion without knowing if you were alive or dead. Yili smiled and pulled Su Hongyan into the study to sit down, smiling as she said, "What do you mean by alive or dead? Is fine. I've made uncle and aunt worried these days." Su Hongyan faintly glanced at her. "You know we're worried, but you still stopped your second brother outside. If I personally came today, you wouldn't have sent any news to the family?" Yili looked with some difficulty at Su Hongyan and said, "Uncle, these days, my fu." Su Hongyan frowned and said, "These days, Jing has been very chaotic. The people in my fu were sent by you?" Yili nodded and said, "I'm afraid that there will be chaos in the capital in the next few days. Uncle and aunt should be careful." Su Hongyan frowned and said, "What does the emperor mean?" Chapter 297. Yili smiled helplessly as she said, "What other meaning can there be? Using the prince's absence to use someone else's hand to destroy the Prince Ding mansion. Even if the prince comes back, it can't be blamed on the emperor, right? At that time, the prince will either lower his head and swallow this loss. If the prince can't help but attack the emperor, then the Ding mansion will be ungrateful. Lear will most likely become a femme fatale." How could Su Hongyan not know this? He was even more disappointed in the emperor's actions. Looking at Yili, he asked in a soft voice, "You can't always claim to be sick. What plans do you have?" Yili lowered her eyes and gave a faint smile, "Catch them all in one fell swoop, so that no one in the world will dare to have designs on the Ding mansion." Su Hongyan looked with surprise at Yili. The niece in front of him seemed to be as gentle as before, but the coldness that flashed across her brows let people know that she wasn't as harmless as she appeared on the surface. Su Hongyan sighed and said, "Is it a problem for uncle to stay in your mansion for a few days?" Yili frowned and said disapprovingly, "Uncle, how can this be?" Su Hongyan raised an eyebrow. "Everyone says that the niece is like a mother. Can uncle not enjoy the good fortune of a niece?" Yili grimaced. In the past, when things were going smoothly, she couldn't even invite her uncle and aunt. She was afraid that they would bring trouble to her and the Prince Ding mansion and cause the emperor to be wary. Right now, the mansion was in chaos. If her uncle came, he could only be in fear. How could he enjoy the good fortune? "Uncle, in a few days, Leah will bring you and aunt into the mansion to enjoy the good fortune, isn't that fine?" Su Hongyan looked faintly at her. He didn't object or agree. Yili helplessly rubbed her nose and lowered her head. She wasn't unfamiliar with her uncle's expression. It meant that it was useless to say anything. He had already made his decision. Yili could only take a step back and say, "If that's the case, Lear will have people clean up the courtyard for uncle." Qin Feng, Mo Hua. Qin Feng and Mo Hua came in from outside. They looked at Su Hongyan and respectfully bowed, "Greetings to Wang Fei, greetings to Su Darren." Yili waved her hand and said, "There's no need for formalities. Jojo will be staying in the Fu for a few days. Mo Hua, make the arrangements." Mo Hua nodded. She understood that Wang Fei's meaning was for her to arrange for a shadow guard to secretly protect Su Hongyan. Qin Feng asked, "Wang Fei, should we send more people to protect the Su family and the Yi family?" Yili said, "Mo Hua should send a few more shadow guards to protect Su Furen and Su Ergongzi. There's no need for the Yi residents. Who in the capital doesn't know that this consort has a cold relationship with her maternal family? If we send too many people, it will only put them in danger." "I understand. This subordinate will do it immediately." Mo Hua nodded and turned to leave. Qin Feng looked at Su Hongyan and said, "Wang Fei, Su Darren's courtyard is arranged in," Yili said, "Arrange it in the courtyard closest to the main courtyard. In addition, send someone to inform Feng San. Tell him to move faster. The sooner this matter is resolved, the better." Qin Feng's spirit was aroused. He smiled and said, "I understand. I will immediately send someone to inform Feng San Gongzi." These days, they had been annoyed to death by wave after wave of assassins. Being able to resolve it all in one go naturally made his mood happy. Turning around to leave, Qin Feng's mood soared. Wang Fei had said the code name, Mia. Therefore, the assassins who dared to step into the Fu must not leave alive. Late at night, Ding Wang Fu was silent. In the study room, Yili sat under the lamp. She turned her head to look at Feng Zhiyao, who was sitting not far away. Feng San, are you sure it's tonight? Feng Zhiyao leisurely waved his fan. His smile made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. The words that came out of his mouth made people tremble with fear. Wang Fei, don't worry. The capital is only so big. If they don't make a move tonight, they won't have another chance. Tonight, the enemy's blood will definitely dye the entire Prince Ding mansion red. Hee. This is a beautiful and mesmerizing color. The capital hasn't been so lively for many years. After so many days of strange happenings, if the Ding Wang Fu's shadow guards still couldn't find them, then the world would think that the Prince Ding mansion's shadow guards were all useless. Yili nodded, that's for the best. Then we'd better wait for their arrival. Mo Hua looked at the calm and indifferent Yili. Her gaze was complicated. She hesitated for a moment before saying, Wang Fei and Su Darren should go to a safe place to hide first. There is no lack of top experts among the people who came tonight. If an accident happens. Yili looked sideways at Su Hongyan, who was calmly drinking tea. She frowned with some worry. She understood her uncle's personality. If she didn't leave, he would definitely not leave. But it was impossible for her to leave now. Seeing her difficult expression, Su Hongyan put down the teacup and said, just do your own thing. I'll just sit here for a while and drink 2 cups of tea. Understanding her uncle's meaning, Yili nodded gently and smiled. Since it's like this, will play 2 rounds with uncle. Su Hongyan nodded and looked at his niece's calm expression with satisfaction. Since she married into the Ding Wang Fu and became Princess Ding, then Yili's fate was tied together with Prince Ding's. It was also destined that she wouldn't be able to live a peaceful life. Since it was like this, whether it was Su Hongyan or the Su family, they all hoped that Yili would be as strong as possible. If she was like her mother, no matter how talented she was, it would be useless if she couldn't survive in this world. Until midnight, the prince's mansion was still silent. Yili and Su Hongyan had already played 3 rounds of chess. With 1 win and 1 loss, it looked like they were going to be tied. The 2 were locked in battle. Even Feng Zhiyao and Steward Mo, who were sitting at the side, couldn't help but go over to watch the game. Feng Zhiyao would occasionally open his mouth to give advice. Yili turned her head and smiled at him. Third young master Feng, a true gentleman doesn't speak when watching chess. Feng Zhiyao rubbed his nose, this young master is helping you. Yili silently rolled her eyes. You're disturbing my train of thought. An extremely soft sound came from the distance. The chess piece in Yili's hand paused slightly. Feng Zhiyao and the others' expressions also froze. Su Hongyan didn't hear anything, but he clearly detected the change in everyone's expressions. He smiled faintly and put down the chess piece, saying, let's stop here today. In this year, Li's chess skills have greatly improved. Yili smiled and put down a chess piece, saying, no matter, it won't be too late to finish this game. Mo Hua, go out and take a look. Mo Hua nodded silently, turned and pushed open the door to go out. By the time they finished speaking, the sounds of fighting outside were gradually approaching. Yili waved her hand for Qing Wan to put away the chessboard. She stood and walked to the window, pushing it open to look outside. The yard was still shrouded in the faint moonlight, but many places outside the yard were lit with fire. Yili lowered her eyes and sighed slightly, saying, have them be careful, don't destroy the century-old Prince Ding mansion. Steward Mo respectfully said, Wang Fei, don't worry. I've already instructed them. Yili nodded. She sat by the window, leaning against the window frame, and said with a smile, that's good. Let's see what kind of people will come tonight. See, in this Dechu state, just how many people wanted to destroy the Prince Ding mansion. Chapter 298. The sounds of fighting outside the courtyard were getting closer and louder. Su Hongyan stood by the window, looking at the flames in the distant sky. He sighed. It seems that the emperor is really planning on watching with folded arms. Yili gently shook her head, softly replying, Jojo, the emperor is not planning on watching with folded arms, but wants to fish in troubled waters. How many of these people do you think came from the palace? How big was Jing City? In the past 10 days, people from all sides had continuously provoked the Ding Wangfu. They had lost no less than 100 people. How many people could still be hiding in Jing City? If it wasn't for the fact that there were capable people behind them, how could so many experts sneak into Jing City so easily? If it was really so powerful, the emperors of the other countries wouldn't be able to sleep at night. Su Hongyan was startled. In the end, he could only give a long sigh. Why is the emperor doing this? When the first assassin crossed the wall of the main courtyard, Yili stood up again and walked outside. The Yahuan beside her quickly followed. Yili waved her hand, don't go out. Qing Yuan said, usually, we can't help. Now that Wang Fei doesn't let us follow in the Fu, Nubi feels that we are useless. Qing Shuang and Qing Xia don't know martial arts, so stay in the room. Nubi and Qing Yu should follow Wang Fei. Seeing her so insistent, Yili frowned slightly but didn't say anything else. She turned and walked out of the study. In the courtyard, Zhuo Jing and Feng Zhiyao came to greet her. Seeing Yili come out, Feng Zhiyao said, there are a few groups of people heading towards the ancestral hall. They should be there to enshrine the embracing cloud sword. The others are heading towards the main courtyard, but there are a few who went to the library. Yili smiled faintly, no matter why they came, if they all stay, don't think of leaving alive. Yes. Feng Zhiyao laughed loudly. He cupped his hands towards Yili and flew out of the courtyard. His red robe faintly carried a cold and bloody aura. Gradually, the sounds of fighting gathered outside the main courtyard. The guards of the Prince Ding mansion seemed to be unable to hold on any longer. Yili stood under the eaves. Although she couldn't see the situation outside, she could hear the sounds of fighting and smell the thick scent of blood carried by the night wind. Suddenly, a few black shadows broke through the walls of the courtyard and leaped in. They almost immediately saw Yili standing under the eaves, dressed in white. A few dark figures pounced towards Yili at the same time. Their lightning-fast momentum made it clear that they were not ordinary assassins, but real experts. Yili's literary style did not change, as if the murderous intent surging towards her did not exist at all. Just as the black shadow was about to reach her, Zhuo Jing, who was standing beside her, suddenly moved. He raised his hand and a cold light flew out from his sleeve and swept towards the person in front. At the same time, in the shadows, several sharp arrows shot out. The arrows were neatly arranged in a row and stabbed into the ground in the same direction. They drew a straight white line between the two sides as a warning to stop. The leader of the black-clothed men stood still and swept his eyes over the arrows on the ground. He raised his left arm and a long tear appeared on the sleeve of his left arm. The guards of the Ding King Fu, you truly live up to your reputation. The black-clothed man said in a deep voice. Yili pursed her lips and smiled slightly, you flatter me. The black-clothed man's sharp eyes narrowed slightly and a cold light appeared in his eyes, the Ding King's consort. Yili nodded and smiled faintly, that's right. How do I address you? The black-clothed man snorted, you don't need to know who I am. You just need to know that I am the person who came to take your life. Yili did not care about his threatening words. She raised her eyebrows and smiled, oh. Coincidentally, Ben Fei also wants to know how many people want to take Ben Fei's life. Since you have come, then stay here with me. She raised her hand and a red light whistled out with a sharp sound into the night sky. A giant red flower bloomed in the sky. The strange red color instantly covered the sky of the Ding King Fu, making the people who looked up suddenly have an ominous premonition. The black-clothed man was alert. He did not look at the night sky, but looked around vigilantly. There seemed to be something in the darkness. The black-clothed man wanted to listen carefully. But at this time, there was killing outside. Even if he had deep internal energy, he could not hear anything. On the wall, Feng Zhiyao's red clothes sent an assassin flying. He looked admiringly at the sky and smiled. Wang Fei, what kind of flower is this? It is very beautiful. Ben Gongzi will make a robe later and embroidered with this kind of flower. Yi Li's mouth couldn't help but twitch. She said faintly, this is the red spider lily, also known as the red spider lily. The only scenery on the road to the underworld is also known as the flower of death. Feng Zhiyao's body paused and he almost fell off the wall. He laughed dryly. Wang Fei really knows how to joke. Feng San, are you here to play? It was unknown when Mo Hua appeared on the wall. She looked down coldly at the people in the courtyard. Daring to break into the main courtyard of the Ding King Fu. You are really tired of living. Zhang Qilan was dressed in a battle robe. He held a long spear and stood at the corner of the eaves. He was originally tall and sturdy. His entire life of military training had been refined into a baleful aura. At this time, standing on the eaves, he had the intention of sweeping through the 6 directions. The black-clothed man quickly found that he had been surrounded by the experts of the Ding King Fu. Under normal circumstances, he should immediately go forward and capture Princess Ding as a hostage to escape. But seeing the Ding King Fu leisurely standing under the eaves with only 2 women and 1 man, he suddenly hesitated. Was it really right to go forward? Could it be another trap? Princess Ding is so scheming. After enduring for so many days, it was actually just to lure us into a trap. The black-clothed man stared at Yi Li. Yi Li laughed crisply, it's nothing. Compared to all of you, my prince has not left the capital and all of you are busy scheming. The prince has just left and all of you have come to bully me, a weak woman. This consort feels that this is already kind enough. These days, all of you must have played enough. Now, why don't you take a look at my Ding King Fu's handiwork? Outside the wall, the guards of the Prince Ding mansion who were gradually unable to resist suddenly became more courageous. In the darkness, countless people once again joined in. The situation outside seemed to have turned around in the blink of an eye. No more assassins attempted to jump over the high wall and break into the main courtyard. More wanted to escape. But at the same time, the Ding King Fu's elite shadow guard appeared at the exit. Attacking from both sides, the Ding King Fu became even more lively. Understanding that they were trapped inside, the black-clothed men in the courtyard started to become anxious. A few did not think carefully and raised their weapons to charge in the direction of Yi Li. Zhuo Jing and Qing Wan, who were beside Yi Li, calmly went up to meet them. On the high wall, Feng Zhiyao frowned as he looked at the situation in the courtyard. He found that there was no need for him to intervene. He turned his head to observe the situation outside the courtyard. He saw a few figures quickly fly past, leaving a ground full of black-clothed corpses. He couldn't help but sigh in admiration. Wang Fei has good methods. If the Mahist army had such skills, would there be any need to worry about the world being unstable? Mo Hua stood beside him and followed his gaze. His expression changed slightly and he remained silent. Chapter 299. Yi Li silently watched as the black-clothed men died under the arrows. She raised her head to look at the remaining people. The leader of the black-clothed men chuckled and said, "Good, as expected of the Ding Kingdom, as expected of the Black Cloud Cavalry. However, does the princess think that we only have these preparations?" Yi Li slowly walked down from the roof and calmly looked at the black-clothed men. "No matter how much preparation you have, I don't plan on letting you leave alive today. You should be the true leader of the night assassins, right? The black-clothed man was startled and quickly smiled. It seems that my people have already told the princess everything. Good method. Since that's the case, then let's see who's the real deal. After speaking, the black-clothed man suddenly flew up and pounced at Yi Li. During this time, he even dodged the 2 arrows that were shot from the shadows. Zhuo Jing frowned and raised his hand to signal for the arrows to stop. Yi Li calmly looked at the black-clothed man's ferocious momentum. She slightly moved her body to the side to avoid a knife. Her sleeves fluttered and a silver knife flew towards the black-clothed man's wrist. A trace of astonishment flashed through the black-clothed man's eyes. He turned the large knife in his hand and cut off Yi Li's attack. Yi Li lightly snorted and the dagger in her hand blocked the large knife. She then let go of the dagger and quickly used her other hand to stab at the black-clothed man's left ribs. Yi Li's dagger was originally made by an expert Mo Xiaoyao using cold iron essence according to her own drawing. Not only was the style strange, but it could also cut through iron like mud. The moment it collided with the large knife, sparks flew everywhere. It actually didn't fall and left a trace of a scar on the knife. The dagger itself was still in perfect condition and was still emitting cold light. The black-clothed man quickly dodged Yi Li's attack and the gaze he used to stare at Yi Li became even more dangerous. Originally, he didn't put this princess consort of Ding in his eyes because this princess Ding's internal energy couldn't even be considered an expert. It could only be considered not bad. But in just a short exchange, Princess Ding, who didn't rely on her internal energy at all, almost made him suffer. If this woman had a high level of internal energy, the black-clothed man didn't dare to think that he would be her opponent. Yi Li did not intend to fight the other party head-on. She knew when to stop and quickly retreated to a safe distance. He looked at the black-clothed man indifferently and said with a smile, "The leader of the night killers is only so. Take him down." "Yes." Zhuo Jing nodded and gestured into the darkness. In the darkness, a few figures quietly appeared in the courtyard and started to fight with the black-clothed men without saying a word. These people's martial arts were very similar to Yi Li's. Strictly speaking, they were far from being a match for the black-clothed men. However, they were very accurate and fast, which made people speechless. As long as a blade, palm, or circle hit the black-clothed man, it would definitely cause a lot of damage to him. However, they cooperated with each other very well. In addition, they had the secret help of a master archer. In less than a quarter of an hour, they took down all the assassins in the courtyard. Only 2 of them suffered light injuries. The leader of the night killers had his acupuncture points sealed and was tied up in a strange way with a rope. Yi Li walked over and said with a faint smile, "I heard that the true identity of the leader of the night killers is very mysterious. Even the Tianyi Pavilion, which is known to be the most well-informed in the world, doesn't know. It seems that this consort will be able to solve this mystery today." Zhuo Jing reached out and untied the mask on the black-clothed man's face, revealing a 40-something-year-old face with a determined expression. Yi Li calmly looked at the stranger in front of her. Feng Zhiyao, who had been standing on the wall and watching them the entire time, actually fell down from the wall this time. He stared at the black-clothed man and cried out in alarm, "Mu Qingsang." Feng Zhiyao fell into the courtyard and frowned as he looked at the black-clothed man in front of him. Hearing this, Yi Li raised her eyebrows with interest and said with a faint smile, "The Chu State's #1 expert. Mu Qingsang. You're even willing to send out such a top expert. Your Highness really thinks highly of this consort." Mu Qingsang's expression was cold as he said faintly, "This one doesn't understand what princess means. The night killers are paid to do things. What does it matter if your Highness or not?" Yi Li raised her eyebrows and looked at him with a faint smile in her eyes. She didn't know why, but Mu Qingsang seemed to be unable to withstand her gaze and turned his head away in a somewhat awkward manner. Yi Li tilted her head and sized him up a few times. She smiled faintly and said, "The Chu State's #1 expert. This consort seems to have exaggerated a bit, right? What right do you have to say that? A trace of anger flashed through Mu Qingsang's eyes. He once again turned his gaze to Yi Li and glared at her. Princess Ding could insult his actions and even his character, but she absolutely could not insult his dignity as De Chu State's #1 expert. He swept his eyes over the people standing around him and sneered, just based on these juniors. Halfway through his words, he met Yi Li's mocking gaze and swallowed the rest of his words with an ugly expression. Regardless of how these people caught him, it was a fact that they caught De Chu State's #1 expert without any losses. Since ancient times, there was no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts. Even if you had the ability to reach the heavens, a loss was a loss. Yi Li nodded and said with a smile, "They were indeed lucky to have defeated you today, but you better believe me. Not to mention one Mu Qingsang, even if there were a few more Mu Qingkangs, this princess would still capture them." Mu Qingsang sneered, obviously not believing her. Yi Li did not get angry and continued, "This consort said that you are De Chu State's #1 expert was exaggerated. It is not because you lost to them. It is because you are already old." Mu Qingsang's heart skipped a beat. His face twisted and gradually became ashen. He was not yet 40 years old and was not considered old for someone who practiced martial arts. However, he was indeed old. Of the 4 great experts in the world, the oldest was Shilin Genom, Prince of Gojoseon. Although he lost an arm in a battle with Mo Lufang in the past, he had real power over Shilin and was famous for his fighting prowess. The second was Yanwang Chamber's master Ling Taihan. Although they were both Jianghu people, Yanwang Chamber's name shook Jianghu. Even the nobles of the 4 countries did not dare to lightly offend them. The youngest was De Chu State's Prince Ding, Mo Xiuyao. Although he was seriously injured and crippled in his youth, his name shook the world in his youth and he was known as the young god of war. As for him, he was a few years older than Ling Taihan. Although he had the title of De Chu State's #1 expert, he could only watch over a single night and slowly grow old. He could neither fight on the battlefield nor roam Jianghu freely. When people talked about the title of De Chu State's #1 expert, they would often sigh with regret. If not for Prince Ding's misfortune, De Chu State's #1 expert would have long been replaced. Yi Li looked at the defeated middle-aged man in front of him with some regret and secretly sighed in his heart. Mu Qingsang's ability and ambition should have been a formidable person. Unfortunately, he could only be controlled by others and was in a dilemma. The title of De Chu State's #1 expert was not so easy to hold. "Since I lost to you, you can kill me or cut me up as you wish," Mu Qingsang said coldly. His eyes were dim and there was a sense of discouragement. Yi Li waved his hand and said indifferently, "Take him away. Mr. Mu, Yi Li respects you as an expert. It's best if you don't act blindly without thinking and do stupid things like suicide or escape." Mu Qingsang snorted softly and allowed the guards beside him to take him away. Feng Zhiyao finally came back to his senses. He patted the non-existent dust off his body and rubbed his forehead as he walked over. That person, how could that person be Mu Qingsang? Chapter 300. Yi Li smiled and said, "Why can't it be Mu Qingsang?" Feng Zhiyao lamented, "He is Mu Qingsang, the #1 expert in De Chu State. He has a noble character and unquestionable integrity, and is unmoved by power." Back then, the emperor used the position of a general to recruit him as an official, but he refused because he had no interest in the bureaucracy and only focused on martial arts. It seems that he studied for so many years to study how to be an assassin. Although Yi Sha was indeed not bad, it was still far from the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce, which was also an assassin organization. Yi Li lowered her eyes, and her red lips slightly hooked up. When awake, he holds the power of the world, and when drunk, he lies on a beauty's knee. The pursuit of all men in the world is nothing more than this. Mu Qingsang doesn't love power or beauty. Do you think this is possible? He loves martial arts. How much better do you think his martial arts is compared to the other 3 experts? Yili asked with a sidelong glance. Feng Zhiyao rubbed his nose and remained silent. Mu Qingsang's martial arts were indeed very high, but as the #1 expert in the Chu state, Feng Zhiyao clearly felt a little disappointed. This was because he wasn't much better than the other 3 experts, and was even somewhat lacking in some aspects. The other 3 were all busy people who were burdened with affairs. In comparison, Mu Qingsang seemed even more inferior to his reputation. How does Wang Fei plan to deal with Mu Qingsang? He is a member of the Mu family. What's wrong with the Mu family? Yili asked with a smile. Feng Zhiyao frowned and said, although we don't fear the Mu family, it's always troublesome to have one more enemy. The Mu family has always been neutral. If because of him. Yili shook her head and said, Feng San, Mu Qingsang's appearance here doesn't make you think of something? With Mu Qingsang's background, do you think he would really go against the Ding royal estate for money? Feng Zhiyao was startled, and his expression sank slightly. It wasn't that he couldn't think of it, but he didn't want to think about it. Although he was not a blood relative of the Ding royal estate, he had grown up with Mo Xiuyao. He knew very well how much the Ding royal estate had sacrificed for the Dechu state. He had even contributed to this effort. Therefore, every time he saw those people who used to be on good terms with Ding country manor without any scruples, he felt not only disappointment and anger, but also endless coldness in his heart. Yili said indifferently, eating from the monarch is a matter of loyalty to the monarch. Feng Zhiyao shook his head and waved away the displeasure in his heart. He raised an eyebrow and smiled. What plans does Wang Fei have? Yili smiled and said, what plans could I have? If the Mu family could afford it, they would return Mu Qingsang to them, so as to avoid hurting the harmony between the 2 families. If you can't afford it, then there's no need for me to leave a powerful enemy alive in this world, right? When the sounds of fighting outside completely disappeared, it was already close to 5:00 in the morning. In the distant horizon, there was already a faint trace of light. Yili led people out of the main courtyard. The thick smell of blood spread in the air. Standing in front of the full moon gate outside the main courtyard, blood flowed like a river and corpses were everywhere. Qing Wan and Qing Yu, who were following behind Yili, couldn't help but rush to the side and vomit when they saw the scene in front of them. Yili closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was only a cold light flowing in her eyes. Greetings Wang Fei. Everywhere in the courtyard, people holding swords and sabers looked at the white-clothed woman standing at the gate and greeted her respectfully. Yili looked solemn and nodded slightly, thank you for your hard work tonight. Zhang Qilan was bathed in blood and sternly said, protecting the Ding royal estate is the responsibility and glory of our Mahist army. Wang Fei's words are too serious. Reporting to Wang Fei, the emperor is here. The steward outside hurried in. Although he was in a hurry, he still didn't lose his composure. Yili was a little surprised. She raised an eyebrow and said, the emperor is here. The steward nodded and said, yes, the emperor is already 2 li away. Should we go out to welcome him? Yili smiled and said, since the emperor left the palace so late at night to come to the Ding royal estate, how can we, as officials, not go out to welcome him? Director Mo, first bring people out to welcome the emperor. Director Mo respectfully acknowledged and waved his hand to bring people out. Yili looked at the people in the courtyard and pursed her lips with a smile, everyone, go out to welcome the emperor. Outside the magnificent Ding royal estate, the corpses on the wide street had already been quickly moved away. However, the street that was dyed red with blood wasn't so easily cleaned up. The dark red blood stains appeared even more eerie and cold under the light of the lamps. The dragon carriage slowly approached under the protection of a large group of imperial guards. The eunuch outside lifted the carriage curtain and Mo Jingqi walked out with his head lowered. When he bent down and saw the dark red blood on the ground, his expression couldn't help but change. He frowned at Director Mo, who was respectfully welcoming him, and asked, where is the Ding royal consort? Director Mo said in a low voice, her royal consort has suffered a shock and is disheveled. Please forgive her for coming late. Mo Jingqi was startled and immediately smiled. It's good that she's safe and sound. Prince Ding isn't in the capital. If anything happens to her, we won't be able to answer to Prince Ding. Seeing Mo Jingqi being helped down from the dragon carriage by the eunuch, Director Mo took a step back and lowered his head, saying, "Thank you for your concern, Your Majesty. Please come in." Naturally, Mo Jingqi wasn't the only one who came along. Following behind the dragon carriage were the officials and nobles of the capital. At this moment, no matter what they were thinking, they all revealed a worried and relieved expression on their faces. Director Mo only saw a pair of old eyes that had seen the world and didn't have the slightest bit of warmth. Mo Jingqi turned back and said to the officials, "Since that's the case, everyone, follow us in to visit her." Zhang Qilan stepped forward and frowned, saying, "Your Majesty, Prince isn't in the capital right now. Isn't it inappropriate for so many officials to enter the Ding royal estate together?" Mo Jingqi's eyes flashed slightly. He stared at Zhang Qilan, asking, "General Zhang, we remember that you control tens of thousands of soldiers near the capital. Why are you here?" Zhang Qilan didn't evade, saying seriously, "Before Prince left, he entrusted me with the safety of the Ding royal estate. Recently, the Ding royal estate hasn't been peaceful, so I led people back to the capital to guard the Ding royal estate. This matter. I've sent a memorial to Your Majesty, but I haven't received Your Majesty's decree. However, the safety of the Ding royal estate is as important as Mount Tai, so I can only return to the capital to ask Your Majesty for punishment." Mo Jingqi only felt a mouthful of blood in his heart. Zhang Qilan's memorial was probably sent along with the other memorials about the Ding royal estate being assassinated. He was too lazy to even look at such memorials and directly threw them to the side. However, right now, he couldn't deny and punish Zhang Qilan in front of everyone because Zhang Qilan had sent a memorial to him. If he didn't agree, it would be premeditated to the death of the Ding royal estate. Even though these were his true thoughts, he couldn't let others know. Forcing a smile, Mo Jingqi said, "General Zhang's words are too serious. General Zhang wholeheartedly serves the country and is a role model for our Dechu state's generals. Today, you've done well in protecting the Ding royal estate. We'll reward you handsomely in the future." Before Zhang Qilan could express his gratitude, an elegant female voice sounded from inside. "Your Majesty is wise. Yi Li will thank Your Majesty on behalf of General Zhang." "Your Majesty is wise. Yi Li will thank Your Majesty on behalf of General Zhang." Chapter 301. From the main entrance, Yi Li walked out, still dressed in white. Standing on the steps outside, she glanced down at the nobles and Mo Jingqi, whose expression was slightly heavy. She slowly walked to Mo Jingqi and bowed slightly. "Ding King's consort Yi Li welcomes Your Majesty." Mo Jingqi was startled. His gaze was complicated as he looked at the kneeling woman in white. However, he did not reveal any hesitation on his face. With a gratified smile, he said, "It's great that Ding King's consort is safe and sound. This way, we can answer to Prince Ding." Was the consort frightened? Yi Li pursed her lips and smiled faintly. It was indeed a little frightening. However, the guards of the king's mansion were personally arranged by Prince. Yi Li believes that as long as they are still breathing, they will not let anyone harm Yi Li. Consort is right. This subordinate swears to protect consort with our lives. Standing by the side, Chief Steward Mo said in a low voice. "Swears to protect consort with our lives." The guards outside the main entrance said in unison. Mo Jingqi's expression darkened slightly. He forced a stiff smile and said, "Everyone in the Prince Ding mansion is loyal and righteous. Consort and Prince Ding are really fortunate. Pass on our decree. Tonight, all the guards of the king's mansion will be rewarded with 10 taels of gold." Yi Li smiled. "Many thanks for Your Majesty's grace." Please come in, Your Majesty. Mo Jingqi was about to step in when he saw the faint traces of blood seeping out from the main entrance. The morning breeze blew slightly. The smell of blood from the main entrance was even stronger than outside. Just by imagining, one could imagine how intense the killing in the Prince Ding mansion was. Mo Jingqi's expression stiffened. He smiled and said, "Now that Prince Ding is not in the mansion, we will not enter. Consort was frightened today and should rest well. Later, we will have the Empress send a few imperial physicians to treat Consort. We will return to the palace first. The morning court will begin soon." Yili nodded, respectfully saying, "Since that is the case, Yili respectfully sends Your Majesty off." Mo Jingqi waved his hand and turned to return to the dragon carriage. Not long after, the dragon carriage headed towards the imperial palace under the escort of the palace guards and nobles. Yili stood outside the gate until Long Yang disappeared at the corner of the street. Chief Steward Mo came forward and said, "Wang Fei." Yili smiled faintly and said, "Let's go home." Turning around to return to the Fu, Yili slowly walked through the blood-soaked corridors of the garden. She coldly looked at the corpses being carried away or still lying in the courtyard. In the end, she walked back to the study. Su Hongyan was still sitting in the study drinking tea, just like when Yili had left. However, there was an additional volume of poetry in his hand that he had read halfway. When he heard Yili come in, he put down the book in his hand, looked at her and asked, "Are you okay?" Yili smiled and said apologetically, "I've made Uncle worry." Su Hongyan shook his head and said, "Right now, our family can't help you much. Are there any casualties in the Fu?" Yili sighed softly and said, "Deaths and injuries are unavoidable. Everything is fine. Li will handle it properly. Uncle, don't worry." Su Hongyan said softly, "Uncle only found out tonight that Li is much more reliable than your second brother. You can deal with these matters as you see fit. Uncle won't say too much. If there is anything our family can help with, just send someone to the Imperial Censor Manor to inform us." Yili nodded and said softly, "Li understands. I've made Uncle worry." Wang Fei. Not long after, Feng Zhiyao and the rest finished handling the matters outside and came in to report. Yili nodded and invited everyone to sit down. She asked softly, "How are things going?" Feng Zhiyao smiled in high spirits and said, "Wang Fei, don't worry. We've already caught all the enemies in one fell swoop. Although General Sun hasn't returned yet, is Wang Fei still worried about the Black Cloud Cavalry's strength?" Yili smiled and said, "I believe in General Sun and the Black Cloud Cavalry's ability. Everyone, tell me about your own situation." Zhang Qilan said in a clear voice, reporting to Princess Consort, "All the assassins outside Prince Ding's Fu have been taken down. Those who resist stubbornly will be killed." A mighty military general, even if it was a simple report, it was filled with killing intent. Reporting to Wang Fei, "All the suspicious people in the capital have fallen into the hands of the Shadow Guard. 36 people who resisted were executed." Mo Hua reported in a deep voice. Qin Feng stood with his hands by his side and said indifferently, "All the assassins who entered the Prince Ding mansion were killed without mercy." Mo Hua raised his head and looked at Qin Feng without saying anything. Feng Zhiyao waved his folding fan and said with a smile, "It seems like we've caught all those bastards tonight. We'll be busy these 2 days. Qin Feng, don't fight with me." Qin Feng didn't even lift his eyelids and said indifferently, "This subordinate will naturally listen to Wang Fei's orders." Feng Zhiyao curled his lips and looked at Yili eagerly. Yili smiled and said, "If Feng San is interested, you can follow Qin Feng to take a look. You can also give them some advice. After all, they have too little experience in this area." Feng Zhiyao's eyes lit up and he cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Thank you Wang Fei." Subordinate Sun Yan requests to see Wang Fei. Sun Yan's deep voice came from outside the door. Yili said with a smile, "General Sun, please come in. We'll be waiting for you." Sun Yan pushed open the door and came in. He looked at everyone present and cupped his hands to Yili, saying, Wang Fei has great foresight. This subordinate sent people to guard all the important roads leaving the capital. At 5:00 in the morning, we encountered many suspicious people who escaped from the capital. We killed 26 people on the spot and captured 7 alive. Wang Fei, please give your orders. Yili rubbed her forehead and said, we captured so many people. Our Prince Ding mansion definitely won't be able to lock them up. Qin Feng, Zhuo Jing, you should choose early. If there's no use, send them to the Supreme Court. Qin Feng and Zhuo Jing both nodded and turned to leave. Feng Zhiyao looked at everyone and asked with a smile, Wang Fei, what do you plan to do with Mu Qingsang? Other than Mo Hua, who was on the battlefield, Zhang Qilan and Sun Yan were stunned. Mu Qingsang. Although they were in the military, they had heard of Mu Qingsang's reputation as the #1 expert in Dechu state. They didn't expect Mu Qingsang to fall into Wang Fei's hands. Su Hongyan frowned and asked, Mu Qingsang is the illegitimate son of Marquis Muyang's Fu. Director Mo said with a smile, that's right. Although not many people know of Mu Qingsang's family background, there are still a few families in the capital that know. He is Marquis Muyang's eldest son and the eldest brother of Marquis Muyang's heir, Mu Yang. Zhang Qilan and Sun Yan were stunned again. They only knew of Mu Qingsang's reputation as the #1 expert, but didn't know he had such a background. However, Marquis Muyang only had Mu Yang, his only son, when he was in his 30s. If he had a son as old as Mu Qingsang, it was still acceptable. However, the secrets of the noble families were not known to outsiders. Su Hongyan was silent for a long time. In the end, he sighed deeply and stood up, saying, Li, you can decide on these matters yourself. This old man is a bit tired and will return to my room to rest for a while. Yili nodded and hurriedly had someone send Su Hongyan back to his room. Seeing Su Hongyan leave, Feng Zhiyao asked in confusion, what does Su Darren mean? Yili said lightly, nothing. Uncle is just disappointed in some people and some matters. With second uncle's nimble mind, how could he not guess who was behind Mu Qingsang? Chapter 302. Feng Zhiyao didn't care and said with a smile, actually, I'm not interested in how Wang Fei will deal with Mu Qingsang. This subordinate is more interested in who the people who captured Mu Qingsang are. When these words were said, all the gazes in the study fell on Yili. Yili lowered her head to take a sip of tea. Looking at the gradually brightening sky outside, she smiled faintly and said, naturally, they are people from the Prince Ding mansion. As to who they are, I can't tell you right now, but I believe that the prince will personally tell you soon. Zhang Qilan said with some excitement, the prince also knows about these people? Yili raised an eyebrow in surprise and said with a smile, the prince is the master of the Ding King mansion. What does the prince not know about the people under the Ding King mansion? Zhang Qilan clearly sensed his rudeness and said with a bright smile, Wang Fei, please forgive this subordinate. This subordinate's meaning is, since the prince also knows about this troop. Then in the future, can this subordinate ask the prince to transfer a troop like this to the Mahist army? With them joining, no matter what is done, it will be much faster. Yi Li's brows rose slightly as she looked at Zhang Qilan with an excited and joyful expression. She hadn't thought that Zhang Qilan, who looked like a straightforward martial artist, would be very sensitive to the quality of soldiers on the battlefield. Yili didn't dampen his mood and said with a faint smile, when the prince returns, General Zhang can talk with the prince. With the addition of Feng Zhiyao, this torture expert, the interrogation of this batch of assassins progressed very quickly. Of course, this had to do with the large number of people caught this time, as well as their varied backgrounds. On the morning of the third day of the chaos in the Prince Ding mansion, a thick file appeared on Yili's desk. Flipping it open and taking a look, the contents inside were enough to shock anyone. The people who participated in this assassination included the Dechu state, Xiling, northern tribes, and Nanzhao. After reading it, Yili couldn't help but smile bitterly. After so many years, the Ding King mansion had become the target of public criticism. Everyone in the world couldn't wait to get rid of it. However, after this time, there wouldn't be many people who dared to have any ideas about the Ding King mansion. Yili tilted her head to look out the window. Under the bright sunlight, the garden was still filled with flowers. Although it had only been a short 2 days, there was no longer any blood and terror. Wang Fei, Mu Qingsong wants to see Wang Fei. Yili put down the file and smiled. It's only been 3 days and he can't take it anymore. Qin Feng frowned and said, ever since we captured Mu Qingsong, he has been somewhat dispirited. This subordinate obeyed Wang Fei's orders and did not torture him. He was the one who decided to see Wang Fei. Before seeing Wang Fei, he refused to say anything. Yili waved her hand and smiled, it's useless to torture someone like Mu Qingsong. Instead, it might arouse the hatred and desire in his heart. Go and bring him here. Qin Feng disapproved, Wang Fei isn't bringing him to the study a bit, it's fine. He can't cause any waves. Go. Not long after, Mu Qingsong was brought into the study. In just a short 3 days, he had changed from the murderous black-clothed assassin that night to a disheveled prisoner with a haggard face. Seeing that Yili's eyes didn't have the slightest bit of vitality and light, Yili sighed in her heart. Mu Qingsong was indeed old. Withdraw. Yili said to Qin Feng, who was beside Mu Qingsong. Qin Feng's knife-like eyes swept past Mu Qingsong's body and silently left. The study was silent. After a long time, Mu Qingsong said, I didn't expect that the Ding Wang Fu's people would be willing to listen to the orders of a teenage girl. Yili faintly said, it doesn't matter if I'm a teenager or a few decades old. Mr. Mu should recognize my other identity. I'm the Ding Wang Fei. This alone is enough to make them listen to my orders. Mu Qingsong shook his head, Ding Wang Fei. A Ding Wang Fei who can command the Black Cloud Cavalry and the Mahist army is rare even in the history of Dechu state. Yili pursed her lips and smiled, Mr. Mu is too kind. What do you want to know? Mu Qingsong directly asked. Yili didn't hold back and asked, what does Mr. Mu want? Mu Qingsong's expression was indifferent. After a long silence, he asked, presumably, Wang Fei knows this one's identity. Yili smiled as she looked at the man in front of her who was only 40 years old but already had a face full of vicissitudes. She neither admitted nor denied it. Mu Qingsong didn't care and asked, did anyone inquire about this one from Wang Fei these past few days? Yili lowered her eyes and faintly smiled, who does Mr. Mu want to inquire about you? After the assassination of the Ding Wang Fu on the night of death, Mr. Mu felt that there was no one in Chujing who would dare to have any relationship with Mr. Mu. To say something bold, even the current emperor wouldn't dare to admit that he has any relationship with you at this time. Mu Qingsong's expression darkened. He looked at Yili and said, presumably, Wang Fei already knows this one's identity. Yili smiled but didn't say anything. Mu Qingsong's eyes became more certain, you're worthy of being the Ding Wang Fei. This one admires you. Yili shook her head, no, I don't know anything. I only hope that the Ding Wang Fu and my family are safe and sound. Then what does Mr. Mu want? Mu Qingsong's eyes were empty and confused. He muttered, what do I want? Yili lowered her eyes and looked at the hands on the table. She softly said, since Mr. Mu wants to see Ben Fei, there must be something you want to make a deal with Ben Fei. Then, there must be something that Mr. Mu wants. Mu Qingsong was silent for a long time. He raised his head and looked at Yili, Wang Fei must know this one's identity very well. I want to know, what am I in their hearts? Yili looked at him with some pity and said faintly, Mr. Mu, why do you have to be like this? If you want to leave these things, it's not impossible. With Mr. Mu's ability, if you leave the people and matters of Chujing, won't you be able to fly freely in the sky? A trace of sadness flashed through Mu Qingsong's eyes. He shook his head. If I want to leave, this one can do it myself. Isn't that right? Mr. Mu, have you decided? Yi Li confirmed. Mu Qingsong nodded firmly. Yi Li gently nodded. In that case, Mr. Mu, please let Ben Fei see what chips you have. Mu Qingsong said, Wang Fei will definitely be satisfied. On this day, a guest who would never appear in the past suddenly appeared in the Marquis Muyang's residence. Marquis Muyang, who had just received the housekeeper's report, was stunned. His face quickly stiffened. Muyang, who was standing beside him, frowned his haggard handsome face, revealing a puzzled look. He was going to get married in a few days, but there wasn't the slightest joy on his young face. Seeing his father's stiff and defeated expression, Mu Yang's resentful heart suddenly softened. He asked in a deep voice, Father, what's wrong? Marquis Muyang raised his head and glanced at him. He forced a smile and said, It's nothing. Father is going out to see Princess Consort Ding. Chapter 303. Mu Yang frowned. Seeing that his father's expression was not good, he said, It's better for this child to accompany father to see Her Highness. This child has also met Princess Ding a few times. Marquis Muyang was stunned and moved by his son's obvious concern. He shook his head and said, There's no need. Princess Ding probably has something important to discuss with father. Father will go see her. Seeing that he was so insistent, Mu Yang did not say anything else. In the study of the Marquis Muyang Fu, Yi Li stood with her hands behind her back, leisurely admiring the famous paintings on the wall. Zhuo Jing stood respectfully at the side. Marquis Muyang pushed open the door and saw the slender figure standing with her back to him. He could not help but be stunned. He quickly reacted and cupped his hands in greetings to Princess Ding. Yi Li turned around and smiled, My lord, please don't be so courteous. Please forgive me for disturbing your peace. Yi Li's faint voice was very pleasant to the ears. She seemed to have purposely emphasized the word peace. These two words were as shocking as thunder to Marquis Muyang. His heart could not help but thump. He forced a smile and said, Princess Consort, you must be joking. Your presence brings light to Marquis Muyang's humble dwelling. Wang Fei, please have a seat. Yi Li did not stand on ceremony and sat down opposite Marquis Muyang. After the maidservant served tea, Marquis Muyang looked at Yi Li and Zhuo Jing who was standing behind him and said hesitantly, Marquis, there's no need to be so polite. This subordinate is just Wang Fei's subordinate. Zhuo Jing said lightly. Zhuo Jing claimed to be a subordinate but Marquis Muyang did not dare to treat him as an ordinary subordinate. Although no one knew Zhuo Jing's original identity, but in these 2 months, most of Princess Ding's affairs were handled by Zhuo Jing and Lin Han. It could be said that these two were completely Princess Ding's personal confidants. Yi Li smiled at Zhuo Jing, sit down and talk. You can't make me and Marquis look up to you when you talk later, right? Zhuo Jing said he did not dare and sat down at the end of the table. The study seemed to have regained its tranquility. The three of them drank their tea quietly, as if they were competing to see who was more patient. Marquis Muyang's eyes fell on Yi Li and Zhuo Jing. Although he still had a smile on his face, he was secretly complaining in his heart. No wonder the emperor was so afraid of Princess Ding. She clearly knew that Prince Ding was not in the mansion and that even if she razed the Prince Ding mansion to the ground, it would be of no use, but she still. Princess Ding had such a temperament at such a young age. She would definitely have a bright future. After a long time, Marquis Muyang sighed softly and looked at Yi Li. Princess Ding, what can I do for you? This consort still has many things to do in the residence, so this consort will take her leave. Marquis Muyang panicked and blurted out, how does Wang Fei plan to deal with that Mu Qingsong? Yi Li's lips curved into a faint smile, indifferent and cold, it's just an assassin. Just kill him. Marquis Muyang's heart turned cold, but he could only watch as Yili stood up and walked out with Zhuo Jing. Zhuo Jing followed behind Yili. When they reached the door, he suddenly turned back to look at Marquis Muyang, who was still in a daze, and said, "Wang Fei has decided to execute all the assassins tonight as a sacrifice for the soldiers who sacrificed their lives to guard the Prince Ding mansion. If Marquis Muyang wants to see someone, it would be best to hurry." Marquis Muyang's eyes flashed and he forced a smile. "Young Master Zhuo is joking. This Marquis does not have anyone to see." Zhuo Jing nodded nonchalantly and turned to follow. When the footsteps of the two people completely disappeared at the end of the corridor, Marquis Muyang, who was still stiffly maintaining his posture of getting up to send off the guest, suddenly fell back into the chair as if he had used up all his strength. A trace of tiredness and guilt flashed through his old but sharp eyes, but more of it was a kind of desperate determination. "Father." Muyang appeared at the door at some point and looked at his rarely dispirited father with a complicated expression. "Father, did Wang Fei say something to make things difficult for you?" Marquis Muyang waved his hand and said with a smile, "It's nothing. Yang, you are about to get married. Don't worry about these things first. Father will naturally take care of these trivial matters. You just need to be a good bridegroom." Muyang frowned and looked at Marquis Muyang, saying in a low voice, "Father, this child is also a descendant of the Mu family. Is there something that you can't tell me?" Marquis Muyang said, "There is really nothing. Yang, you are thinking too much." Muyang said, "This child is not a fool. Father, what does the assassination at the Prince Ding mansion have to do with our family? Otherwise, why would Princess Ding?" "Shut up." Marquis Muyang suddenly roared and stared sharply at Muyang, his expression cold. "Remember clearly, what happened at the Prince Ding mansion has nothing to do with our Mu family." Chapter 304. In fact, this reaction already explained the problem. He looked at his father with a headache and sighed. "Father, do you know what you are doing?" Marquis Muyang was stunned and lowered his eyes. "Father is doing this for the prosperity of Marquis Muyang's residence. Yang, don't worry. Nothing will happen. You may leave." Muyang wanted to say something, but when he saw his father's expression, he swallowed his words and silently left the study. Back at King Ding's residence, Yili turned back to look at Zhuo Jing behind her. "Are you satisfied with this result?" Zhuo Jing was silent for a while before he suddenly raised his hand and wiped his face. A thin layer of leather mask was removed from his face, revealing the sorrowful and weathered face underneath. Actually, Mu Qingsang's disguise was not very similar to Zhuo Jing, but not many people had seen Zhuo Jing before. At least, Marquis Muyang had never seen Zhuo Jing before. Zhuo Jing always liked to maintain an expressionless face in front of others, so even Marquis Muyang did not notice anything wrong with Mu Qingsang's stiff expression. Mu Qingsang lowered his head and said indifferently, "I admit defeat." Yili did not show any signs of complacency. "It's just a deal. Now, tell me what you know. Aren't you afraid that I will break the promise?" Yili sneered. "If you break the promise, I will kill Marquis Muyang." Mu Qingsang closed his eyes tiredly. "I know. I will tell you what I know. Ask." Yili kept the smile on her face and looked at the person in front of her with a serious expression. "How did the former Prince Ding, Mo Xiuwen, die?" Mu Qingsang was stunned. He did not expect her to ask such a question the moment she opened her mouth. He was rather straightforward and said calmly, "I killed him." Yili raised her brows and did not say anything. Mu Qingsang said, "That year, I was ordered to go to the border where the northern tribes were fighting and throw poison into Mo Xiuwen's water to create the illusion that he died of illness." Yili stared at him coldly and sneered. "Mr. Mu really dares to say anything." Mu Qingsang didn't care at all and said indifferently, "Since I promised the princess consort, I will naturally keep my promise. If Princess Consort doesn't dare to listen, then just pretend that I didn't say anything." Yili snorted and said, Mr. Mu, you only said half of it. Of course, I don't dare to listen. Mu Qingsang lowered his eyes and said, with Wang Fei's intelligence and wisdom, do you still need me to elaborate on the rest? Yili closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and said, well, this consort won't ask Mr. Mu about the mastermind behind the scenes. Mr. Mu, please tell me everything you know. Also, this consort cannot guarantee Mr. Mu's safety. Mu Qingsang said indifferently, it's fine. At this point, it makes no difference to me whether I live or die. In the study, it was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Yili silently looked at the middle-aged man sitting in front of her. Her beautiful face was calm and expressionless, but she still couldn't stop the turbulent waves that surged in her heart because of what she just heard. Mo Xiuwen died young due to illness. Many people could guess that there must be some secrets that outsiders didn't know about, but even Yili didn't think that Mo Xiuwen's death would be related to that person in the palace. That year, when Mo Xiuwen died of illness and the Mahist army suffered a setback, the current emperor had ascended the throne for less than 3 years, and he acted so hastily on the Prince Ding mansion. What else does Princess Consort want to know? Mu Qingsang looked at Yili with a faint smile, and there was a hint of schadenfreude in his expression. Yili said indifferently, everything. Mu Qingsang was startled and stared at Yili, everything? Has Princess Consort thought it through? You must know that this secret is enough to affect the entire De Chu state and even the entire world. Yili smiled coldly. Although this consort has never met the previous Prince Ding, he is my husband's elder brother, and also my elder brother. Moreover, you have fallen into my hands. Do you think that if I don't listen to others, I won't know this secret? Mu Qingsang was silent for a moment, then sighed. Prince Ding is really lucky. Since Princess Consort insists, this one will tell Princess Consort everything. Treat it as repaying Princess Consort for fulfilling this one's wish. Yili and Mu Qingsang sat in the study for the entire morning, and no one knew what they talked about. When they came out of the study, their expressions were somewhat grave. Mu Qingsang was escorted away by 2 shadow guards. Before he left, he suddenly turned back to look at Yili and smiled. This one can see that Princess Consort is a decisive person. Why don't I give you another piece of information for free? Yili said indifferently, I'm all ears. Shi Ling has already decided to send troops to the De Chu state on August 15th. What does Princess Consort plan to do? After he finished speaking, without looking at Yili's expression, Mu Qingsang changed his previous decadent and gloomy expression and left with a wild laugh. The smile on Yili's lips gradually faded. After looking at the sky above the courtyard for a long time, Yili turned and left with a flick of her sleeve. Inform Feng San and Sun Yan to come see me in the study immediately. Feng Zhiyao and Sun Yan arrived very quickly. The two of them felt that they had arrived at almost the same time. As soon as they entered the study, they saw Yili and Zhuo Jing sitting behind the desk and flipping through thick files. Feng Zhiyao glanced at them casually. They were the confessions of the captured assassins and all kinds of information collected by the Shadow Guard. Raising his eyebrows, Feng Zhiyao smiled and said, Princess Consort, what happened? Yili looked up at him and said, something did happen. Feng Zhiyao stilled. His originally relaxed figure slowly straightened as he looked at Yili with a serious expression. Sun Yan's expression was also solemn as he listened attentively. Yili picked up a file and said, just now, Mu Qingsang told me that Shi Ling is preparing to send troops to the De Chu state on August 15th. A startled expression flashed across Feng Zhiyao's face. His sword-like brows furrowed slightly. Is this information reliable? We have not received any information in this regard. Yili shook her head and said, I don't know. Mu Qingsang would not lie. But the authenticity of this information needs to be verified. But... Yili paused and looked at the two people in front of her and asked, what day is it today? Sun Yan said, August 7th. Feng Zhiyao's expression also changed. He stood and said, if this information is false, then so be it. But if it is true? If it was true, although the Northwest Air Force was not empty, many of the important positions had been controlled by Mo Jingqi's trusted aides. The Mahist army was restrained everywhere. If the West Hills suddenly attacked, they would definitely be caught off guard. Right now, they were in the capital. It was impossible for them to reach the border in 7 or 8 days. Feng Zhiyao said thoughtfully, the prince has already left the capital for more than 20 days. According to the speed of the marriage procession, they should have already entered the northern tribes. Not to mention that the prince has the important task of escorting the bride. Even if he did not have anything to do, it would take at least half a month to reach Xiling's border to take charge of the situation. Furthermore, the prince could not have received the news immediately. Feng Zhiyao suddenly had a bad feeling. It seemed that the entire matter was a plot against the Dechu state. Princess consort. Yili frowned and said, what do you think? Just say it. Chapter 305. Sun Yan said with a serious face, whether it's true or not, we have to prepare early. If it's false, it's fine, but if it's true. Feng Zhiyao's face was grave. He frowned and said, I think this news is very likely to be true, but the Shadow Guard didn't receive any news at all. Yili said indifferently, you forgot that there's a person who can be said to be a top expert in intelligence. And now, he's in West Hill. Han Mingyue. Feng Zhiyao exclaimed. Yili nodded slightly. Although the Tianyi Pavilion's influence in Dechu State has been reorganized by Han Mingxi, don't forget that Han Mingyue is the real master of the Tianyi Pavilion. Moreover, the Tianyi Pavilion is spread across all countries. Only Dechu State is damaged. Han Mingyue was once a good friend of the prince. He's the person who knows the Prince Ding mansion the best in the world. Even if he's not the first, he's definitely in the top 3. Feng Zhiyao nodded and said, I'll send someone to investigate immediately. Sun Yan asked, my lady, what should we do now? Yili lowered her eyebrows and pondered for a moment. She said, send someone to inform the prince immediately. Also, send word to the Mahist army stationed near the border of West Hill to be ready to support the border at any time. Sun Yan said with some difficulty, in the past few years, the Mahist army's encampment has been shrinking again and again. Now, the Mahist army's encampment is at least 5 or 6 days away from the border of West Hill. Including the time it takes for us to send the message, I'm afraid. Yili raised her hand and said, whether it's in time or not, it's too late to stop the Xiling army's advance. Sun Yan nodded and said, I understand. I'll immediately send a message to the Mahist army. Please rest assured, my lady. As long as the Mahist army has a single soldier, the Mahist army won't be able to cross the defense line of the West Hill army. Yili nodded and said softly, thank you, General Sunday. This consort will enter the palace to see the emperor. Princess, I'm afraid that's not appropriate. Feng Zhiyao frowned. Ever since they caught Mu Qingsong, although they didn't say it clearly, everyone knew who had tried to massacre the Prince Ding mansion. Yili smiled faintly and said, there's nothing inappropriate about it. Even if that person in the palace dares to make a move against me, he may not have the ability to keep me here. Feng Zhiyao thought about the mysterious troops and his heart calmed down a little. He said, Wang Fei knows what to do. Yili stood up and put down the file in her hands. She said, go and do your work. In addition, the mansion will continue to be on full alert. Yes. Imperial Palace. In the Imperial Study, Mo Jingqi dismissed Marquis Muyang, who had hurried over to seek an audience. His face was gloomy and uncertain as he stared at the memorial in front of him, the look in his eyes changing unpredictably. Reporting to Your Majesty, Princess Ding requests an audience. The eunuch outside the door reported. Mo Jingqi frowned. Princess Ding. Why did she come back? Thinking about a few days ago at dawn, the blood-covered ground of the Ding mansion and the white-clothed woman standing gracefully on the steps, Mo Jingqi's heart always felt a sense of loss and regret. He had personally appointed this woman to Mo Xiuyao in order to humiliate him. But now, this woman had become another pillar of support for the Ding mansion and Mo Xiuyao's biggest support. At the same time, she had become a target that he had to eliminate. With Yi Li's intelligence, since she had already found the Marquis Muyang's residence, Mo Jingqi didn't believe that she wouldn't be able to guess the truth. But why did she dare to enter the palace now? Let her in. Not long after, the door was pushed open again. Yi Li walked in wearing the Princess Ding mansion's silver-white ceremonial dress with a dark silver luan and phoenix pattern. This was almost the first time that Yi Li had worn the Princess Ding mansion's ceremonial dress. It was different from the elegant and graceful feeling that she usually gave people. The silver-white color made her seem cold and unapproachable like ice. Yi Li walked to the middle of the hall and bowed. Yi Li greets the emperor. Mo Jingqi sized up Yi Li. After a long time, he finally spoke. Speaking of this, Zhen has never heard of Princess Ding calling herself. Yi Li pursed her lips and gave a faint smile. Yi Li is Yi Li, of course. She knew that in front of the emperor, empress, and empress dowager, all the women with official titles referred to themselves as Qinxie. But she didn't like this title. In the past, the emperor, empress, and empress dowager had never mentioned it. Other people naturally didn't dare to find fault with her on such a small matter and ignored it. She didn't think that Mo Jingqi would ask this today. Mo Jingqi's eyes flashed and he quickly smiled. Yi Li is Yi Li. Then in Princess Ding's heart, is she not a subject of the Dechu state? Yi Li raised her head and looked directly at Mo Jingqi without avoiding his gaze. She slowly said, the Ding mansion has protected the Dechu state for generations and has done their best. Yi Li is the Princess Ding mansion, how could she have such a rebellious heart? Mo Jingqi looked at her playfully and said with a smile, oh. Wang Fei's meaning is that the Ding mansion will never have a rebellious heart. Looking at Mo Jingqi's probing gaze, Yi Li laughed coldly in her heart. She said firmly, the Ding mansion will never do anything to betray the Dechu state. Hearing this, Mo Jingqi was silent for a long time before finally saying, all right, Zhen believes Princess Ding's words. Why has Princess Ding come to the palace today? Yi Li nodded and said, there is indeed a very important matter to report to your majesty. Mo Jingqi nodded. Princess Ding, please speak. Yi Li said softly, Yi Li has just received news that Xi Ling will send troops to the Dechu state on the 15th of the 8th month. Asking your majesty to make early preparations. Mo Jingqi paused and laughed after a long time. He looked at Yi Li and said, Princess Ding, isn't this news too sudden? From what Jin knows, Xi Ling's main goal is to deal with the northern tribes and not the Dechu state. Who did Wang Fei hear this news from? Yi Li pursed her lips and frowned slightly. I hope that your majesty can send troops to support as soon as possible, just in case. Zhen will not send troops just because of Wang Fei's words, unless Wang Fei can prove the authenticity of this news. Yi Li frowned and said mildly, Mu Qingsang. Hearing this, Mo Jingqi's expression changed a few times. It took him a while to calm down. He stared at the woman standing calmly in front of him with a complicated expression. For a moment, he could not understand why Yi Li would so easily reveal her trump card. He didn't believe that the Ding royal residence wanted to fall out with him now. Not to mention that Mo Xiuyao was not here now. Even if Mo Xiuyao was in the capital, the Ding royal residence would not suddenly do anything that was disadvantageous to Great Chu. However, if Yi Li truly wanted to provide some military intelligence, then she would not have openly revealed Mu Qingsang's matter. The Ding king's residence had many sources of information. How could they not find a suitable excuse? After a long time, Mo Jingqi said mildly, Zhen understands what Princess Ding is saying. Yi Li raised her head to look at the man on the dragon throne and frowned slightly. Mo Jingqi did not give her a chance to speak. He stood up and waved his hand. Zhen understands this matter. Princess Ding, you can go back first. Yili sighed softly in her heart. She bowed slightly and said, Yili will take her leave. After leaving the imperial study, Yili was about to leave the palace and return to her residence when she was stopped. Two familiar palace maids stood in front of Yili and said, Wang Fei, noble consort invites you. Yili thought for a moment and remembered that these two palace maids were noble consort Lu's personal palace maids. Recalling what she heard in the peach forest and the strange look noble consort Lu gave her every time she looked at her, Yili could not help but take a look. She said mildly, this consort has something to do. Please apologize to noble consort Lu on behalf of this consort. When the two palace maids heard this, they looked at each other but did not move aside. They insisted, Wang Fei, please forgive us. Gui Fei Nyang has something important to discuss with Wang Fei. Chapter 306. Yili glanced at the palace maid who spoke, raised her eyebrows and said, Oh? What if this consort doesn't have the time? Well, please forgive us for offending you. The two of them took a step forward. Their steps were steady, and their eyes flashed. Obviously, they were trained in martial arts. Yili raised her hand slightly, indicating that the shadow guards around her didn't need to show up. She looked behind the two palace maids with a frown and sneered, Noble consort, you're so bold. You dare to attack me outside the imperial study? If you came to talk to me nicely, why would I attack you? Noble consort Lu strolled out from the corner of the hall. Her voice was as cold as snow as usual. But Yili couldn't help but think of the sad and mournful voice in the peach forest. Noble consort Lu loved Mo Xiuyao so much that she couldn't get him. But as Mo Xiuyao's wife, Yili didn't feel much sympathy for her. So when she saw noble consort Lu come out, she just said indifferently, no matter what noble consort wants to talk about, have you thought about the consequences of having someone attack me in the imperial palace? Noble consort Lu's beautiful lips curved into a contemptuous smile. Consequences? Do you think the emperor will do anything to I for you? In the past, people let you have your way only because of Prince Ding. Now that Prince Ding isn't in the capital, do you think you can rely on the title of Princess Ding? Yili silently looked at the beautiful woman who was staring at her with contempt. From the first time they met, she felt noble consort Lu's contempt and disdain for her. Probably in noble consort Lu's mind, no one but herself was good enough for Mo Xiuyao. But it was a pity that she had also taken a liking to Mo Xiuyao. In that case, noble consort Lu, if you have something to say, you can say it here. Yili frowned. Noble consort Lu raised her delicate chin slightly, stared at Yili, and said, Come with me. Yili smiled faintly and turned to walk out of the palace. Yili! Noble consort Lu screamed. Seeing Yili turn around and leave without hesitation, noble consort Lu said angrily, Stop her with I. Two palace maids immediately stepped forward, one on the left and one on the right, blocking in front of Yili. A cold light flashed through Yili's eyes. A cold light streaked down from her sleeves. Her silvery white clothes drew a dazzling arc under the sunlight, at the same time bringing out two beautiful flowers of blood. Ah! Two blood-curdling screams rang out. The two palace maids held their wrists and looked at the silver-clothed woman in front of them with pale faces. Bright red blood instantly dyed their wide pink sleeves red. Yili raised the dagger in her hand and looked at it. The bright red blood slid down the shiny blade and slowly dripped to the soil under her feet. Noble consort Lu, who had always been indifferent, finally couldn't help but change her expression. You will personally lead the troops and head to the border at full speed tonight. Qin Feng replied without hesitation, this subordinate accepts the order. Yili raised her head to look at him and said, I'm not asking you to lead people to the border to participate in the war. Even if each of you can fight against 100 people, you won't be able to stop an army of 100,000. Split up the border and investigate all the information about the West Hill and the war situation. Qin Feng nodded and said, "This subordinate understands. Go." The war broke out faster than Yili imagined because the West Hills troops weren't dispatched on the 15th of the 8th month, but on the 9th of the 8th month. By the 15th of the 8th month, the news of the West Hills invasion had already reached the Chu capital. The even more shocking news was that this time, the West Hill Genom of Gojoseon personally led an army of 500,000 to attack the Dechu state, vowing to wash away the shame of being defeated by Mo Lufang back then. The Xiling army had been honing their strength for several years and was unstoppable. They took 2 cities in one day and the entire Chu capital was shaken. As the mistress of the Ding mansion, Yili was also urgently summoned by the emperor to the palace for a discussion. After a few days, Yili stepped into the imperial study again, but the situation was completely different from the last time. As soon as she stepped into the imperial study, she could clearly feel the solemn atmosphere in the study. Yili glanced at the people in the imperial study. Prime Minister Liu, Marquis Muyang, General Zhenghua, Marquis Nan, Marquis Nan's heir, Leng Qingyu, Old Duke Hua, and a young man whom Yili found familiar but didn't know. He wasn't wearing an official's uniform but was standing beside Mo Jingqi's desk in silk clothes. Yili frowned and instinctively disliked this person. This person's shrewd eyes were full of calculation, which ruined his originally handsome face. Yili looked down indifferently. There were 8 people in the study. Prime Minister Liu, Marquis Muyang, and General Zhenghua were all the emperor's confidants. Marquis Nan had never cared about worldly affairs. Although old Duke Hua was close to the Prince Ding mansion, he was already old and had been idle at home for many years. The young man was startled. His expression stiffened before he bowed to Duke Hua. Student Tan Jiji greets Duke Hua. Duke Hua snorted discontentedly and looked at Mo Jingqi. Mo Jingqi smiled and said, "Old Duke, please don't be angry. The successor is an extremely talented young man. I'm planning to give him the position of Imperial Study Advisor to serve the country." Duke Hua bowed to Mo Jingqi and stroked his white beard. He said clearly, "Your Majesty, this old official does not understand your words. Since this young Master Tan is talented, why doesn't he participate in the imperial examinations? If he obtains the title of Zhuang Yuan and Tanhua, no one can say anything even if His Majesty places him in an important position. The Imperial Study Advisor is an important position. If you give it to someone you have never heard of, I'm afraid it will be hard to convince the public." Mo Jingqi and the young man were also somewhat embarrassed. It was not that they did not want to go through the normal channels, but the path of the imperial examinations was not easy to walk. Especially this year's imperial examinations. Putting aside the fact that the main examiner was Dechu State's most upright and honest elder Su, 3 out of the 5 sons of the Su family would be participating in the examinations. Tan Jiji had studied a lot and did not have much confidence in the imperial examinations. Even if he did pass, if he was not the Zhuang Yuan, Tanhua, and Tanhua of the imperial examinations, he would most likely be sent out. Even if he was not sent out, he would at most be a 6th or 7th grade minor official. It was impossible for him to have such an important position as the Imperial Study Advisor. Originally, when the emperor wanted to promote one of his trusted aides, no one would meddle in other people's business. But the mistake was that Tan Jiji should not have instigated the relationship between the emperor and Ding Wangfu in front of all the officials at this time. This made old Duke Hua, who was wholeheartedly devoted to the country, feel that he was an eyesore. Thus, he completely did not consider giving him any face. Mo Jingqi coughed softly, saying, "Old Duke, let's discuss this later. Right now, the most important thing is to send out troops. Prince Ding is not here, and the Mahist army is unable to mobilize hundreds of thousands of troops. What should we do?" Duke Hua did not really want to embarrass the emperor, so he cooperated and said, Prince Ding will definitely rush back as soon as he receives the news. Before that, why doesn't your majesty mobilize troops from other places to support him? Mo Jingqi shook his head and sighed, saying, Old Duke, you also know that the south is currently in a standoff with Prince Li. The people of Nanzhao outside Shattered Snow Pass are also eyeing us covetously. How can we mobilize troops from other places? Duke Hua's expression changed slightly. His snow-white brows moved, but he did not speak. It was not that he did not understand the emperor's thoughts. However, taking advantage of Prince Ding's absence to make things difficult for Princess Ding, and even disregarding the safety of the border, this was not something a qualified emperor should do. Marquis Muyang stepped forward, saying, since Princess Ding is able to mobilize the Mahist army and Black Cloud cavalry, Princess Ding, please consider the overall situation and order the Mahist army to immediately rush to the border to support. Yili raised her head, her gaze calmly sweeping over Marquis Muyang. She said softly, Marquis Muyang means that you want me to lead the army in place of Prince Muyang? Marquis Muyang choked. Since ancient times, even if there were one or two female generals, there had never been a female general who led the army into battle. Furthermore, Princess Ding was only in her teens. Even if she did not do anything now, no one could say anything against her. On the contrary, if Princess Ding really led the army into battle, the Chu state and these generals would lose all their face. With a dry laugh, Marquis Muyang avoided Yi Li's eyes, saying, this marquis did not mean that. I only hope that Princess Consort can prioritize national affairs. Prime Minister Liu on the side also stroked his white beard and said with a smile, Marquis is right. I hope that Princess Consort can temporarily transfer the authority of the Mahist army to the general leading the army for the sake of the people and soldiers at the border. When Prince Ding returns, it will naturally be returned to its rightful place. Yili did not even bother to conceal the mockery in her eyes. When Prince Ding returns. Did they think she was a fool? Yili raised her head and smiled, the Prime Minister's words make this concubine unable to bear the burden of the responsibility. Let's not talk about whether I can mobilize the Mahist army. Let's talk about. Prime Minister Liu, do you think that as long as I say the word, the authority of the Mahist army can be transferred to anyone? I'm afraid that even if Prince Ding comes personally, he can't do it. Mo Jingqi's expression darkened, frowning. Then does Princess Consort have any good ideas? Are we going to let the Xiling army wreak havoc at the border and even invade our Dechu state? Yili wanted to slap the man who was sitting on the dragon throne, staring at her and talking to her in such a dignified manner. If she did not agree, was she going to let the Xiling army wreak havoc in the Dechu state? She finally understood why Mo Xiaoyao did not appear anxious at all these days. It turned out that he wanted to take advantage of Mo Xiaoyao's absence to seize the authority of the Mahist army. It was not that he was not anxious, but in his eyes, the Xiling army at the border was not as important as the authority of the Prince Ding mansion that was about to be in his hands. However, Yili did not understand where Mo Jingqi's confidence came from. Did he think that as long as he got the authority of the Prince Ding mansion, he could immediately control it freely and even lead the army to expel the West Hill? Did he not consider that if he was not careful, it could cause a mutiny? Chapter 308. Yili lowered her head and said, Yili is just a woman. I really don't have any good ideas for your majesty to consider. Please forgive me, your majesty. Duke Hua furrowed his brows and said somewhat anxiously, Your Majesty, since the military power of the Ding King's manor is uncertain, please send Prince Ding back to the capital as soon as possible. No, directly head to the border to lead the troops. Also, this old subject remembers that our Dechu state has millions of soldiers. Other than the Mahist army and the army in the south that is confronting King Li, we can at least send out 100,000 soldiers to support the border. Your Majesty, please send out a group of troops first. Although Mo Jingqi was somewhat unwilling, it was not easy to refute Du Kuo's words. Just as he was hesitating, Marquis Nan, who had been silent all this time, spoke up, "Your Majesty, the old duke's words are reasonable. Please send troops to support the border first. The Xiling army took down 2 cities in 1 day and will reach Xinyang in at most 10 days. Xinyang is the northwest granary of Dechu state. If Xinyang falls..." Mo Jingqi's expression changed. He glanced at Yili and gritted his teeth. "Pass down Zhen's decree. Ling Qingyu will be the main general, and Marquis Nan's heir will be the second. Led 150,000 soldiers and set off today." This general obeys. Ling Qingyu and Marquis Nan's heir bowed in unison. Mo Jingqi's mood was clearly not good. With a gloomy face, he waved his hand and dismissed everyone. After leaving the imperial study, Yili accompanied old Duke Hua out of the palace on foot. Along the way, old Duke Hua had nothing to say and could only sigh endlessly. When they reached the palace gates, he stopped and looked at Yili, saying, "It just so happens that Prince Ding is not in the capital at this time. It's been hard on Princess Consort." Yili pursed her lips and smiled faintly. "I've caused old Duke to worry. These are only part of Yili's duties." Old Duke Hua shook his head and said, "Your Majesty is really taking it too lightly this time. At the end of the day, he was born in the hands of a woman. Compared to the previous emperor, he is still far inferior." Yili understood what the old Duke of Hua meant. When the late emperor ascended the throne, the West Hill and the Dechu state were at war for many years. At that time, Prince Ding Mo Lufang was not only outstanding in governance, but also had outstanding military achievements. He could be said to be the first person after Mo Lanyun in the Ding royal residence. Even with such a great reputation, the late emperor was able to endure and treat Mo Lanyun with great respect and courtesy, all the way until the late emperor's wings were fully grown, and Mo Lufang relinquished power to him. Although he wasn't a wise ruler, he was still a capable ruler who kept his position. The relationship between him and the Prince Regent became a legend. And now, Mo Jingqi had prematurely expressed his hostility towards the Prince Ding mansion. Even when Prince Ding had clearly become a cripple and was hiding in the Ding mansion, he did not give up on suppressing him and suppressing the Mahist army. If he was truly a genius with great talent, it would be fine, but his strength was not enough to suppress the Mahist army. Even if Mo Xiaoyao was willing to hand over the Mahist army to him, it was still the same question. Could he really command the Mahist army? With his breadth of mind, could he treat the Mahist army kindly? "Duke, be careful with your words." Yili softly chuckled. Duke Hua waved his hand, indicating that Yili did not need to send him off, and turned to walk towards his carriage. After watching Duke Hua get on the carriage, Yili turned back to see the Marquis Nan's heir standing not far away and smiling at her. Yili helplessly sighed in her heart. She had only met this brother-in-law a few times and had eaten at the same table in the Yi mansion. It could be said that she was completely unfamiliar with him. Now that the Yi family had declined, Yizhen's life in the Marquis Nan's mansion was not bad. It could be seen that the people in the Marquis Nan's mansion knew how to conduct themselves. Because of this, Yili was also somewhat polite to him. "Greetings, Princess." Yili nodded and smiled faintly. "Heir is too polite." "Heir, is there something you need?" The Marquis Nan's heir smiled. "Nothing. Zhen, misses Princess very much. If Princess is free, why don't you come to the mansion and sit for a while?" Hearing this, Yili raised her brows in surprise. Currently, the emperor's attitude towards the Prince Ding mansion could be seen by anyone. At this time, as the heir, he still invited her to the mansion as a guest. Yili's eyes flashed slightly, and she smiled. It is eldest sister's fortune to be able to meet heir. I hope heir will take good care of her. The Marquis Nan's heir smiled generously. Since Zhen has entered the Marquis Nan's mansion, I naturally treat her as family. Don't worry, Princess. Yili nodded and said, heir will set off for the border tomorrow. I wish you a safe journey. Thank you, Princess, the Marquis Nan's heir said. I will take my leave. I won't see you out, Yili said. After watching him walk away, Yili looked back at the towering palace gate behind her, frowned, and turned to leave. Leng Qingyu and the Marquis Nan's heir hurriedly led the troops away the next day. Yili, who was standing at the city gate to see them off, looked at the army in the distance, but her frown did not relax. Shilin Genim of Gojoseon was known as the Shilin war god and had been in charge of the Shilin country for decades. Even Mo Xiaoyao might not dare to say that he was certain of victory. Could Leng Qingyu and the Marquis Nan's heir really succeed with a mere 100,000 troops? What's wrong, Princess? Zhuo Jing followed beside Yili and asked while looking at her expression. Yili shook her head. Mo Xiaoyao was not the only general in the Dechu state. If she relied on Mo Xiaoyao for everything, she would not be able to do anything. Third sister. Princess. Yizhen's voice came from behind. Yili turned back and saw Yizhen standing beside the heir consort, looking at her in surprise. After not seeing her for a long time, Yizhen looked much paler and more haggard than the last time she saw her. Even her eyes were still red, probably because she was worried about her husband going to the battlefield. The Marquis Nan's heir consort was also a woman from a scholarly family and looked very gentle and virtuous. When she saw Yili, she stepped forward and bowed. Then, she politely asked Yizhen to speak with Yili alone. The two sisters were not very familiar with each other and only saw each other a few times a year. For a moment, they were speechless. After a moment of silence, Yizhen asked in a low voice, "Has Princess gone home to visit?" Yili shook her head. Now that the Yi family was in decline, old Madame Yi clearly blamed everything on Yili. Every time she saw her, she would use her words to pressure her. After so many years, this was the first time that Yili realized that old Madame Yi was so unafraid of power. Even though Minister Yi did not say anything, the expression on his face faintly showed his dissatisfaction with this daughter of the princess. Yili was not someone who liked to make things difficult for herself. Other than when it was necessary, she was too lazy to go back. Yizhen said in a low voice, "Father plans to go back to his hometown in a few days." Yili nodded and said, "It's good to go back. If he teaches Rong, well, the family will still have some wealth. In the future, father and grandmother can enjoy their old age." With the current situation, the Yi family had already withdrawn from the officialdom. Leaving Jing City was the best choice. Otherwise, if he were to be embroiled in those schemes again, it wouldn't be a simple matter of resigning from his position as an official. Yizhen's beautifully decorated brows furrowed slightly. She looked at Yili and said, "Third sister, do you really hate father so much that you can't help father?" Yili shook her head and said softly, "Everyone, it is because I don't hate father that I say it is right for him to go back now. Nothing is more important than life." Chapter 309. There was a trace of confusion in Yili's eyes, but there was more disbelief. She looked at Yili and sighed bitterly, "Second sister is dead, and I don't know if fourth sister is alive or dead. Fifth sister and sixth sister. Let's not talk about them. How can we sisters? Eldest sister, the Southern Marquis estate is still a kind family. The heir consort is also a smart person. She won't make things too difficult for you. You should live your life well," Yili said in a low voice. Yizhen was startled. When she came back to her senses, Yili was already far away. A trace of sorrow and unwillingness appeared in her eyes as she said faintly, "I don't have a child, and I don't have a family. How can I live my life well? Third sister, not everyone has such a good life like you." News from the border came day by day, and the atmosphere in the entire imperial court became more and more solemn. The Shilin army took 3 cities in a row for half a month and approached Xinyang. On the 9th day of the 9th month, news came that Lin Qingsong and the southern Marquis heir had led 100,000 troops to reinforce Xinjiang. Marquis Zhenan had personally led 50,000 troops to intercept and kill them. More than half of them were lost, and the remaining troops retreated to Xinjiang. On the 10th day of the 9th month, Xinjiang was surrounded. At the same time, the Xiling army split into 3 groups and advanced to the north, south, and center. Urgent requests for reinforcements came from all the checkpoints at the border. However, at this time, Prince Dinghua, who had been protecting the Dechu state for 100 years, was still nowhere to be seen. The Dinghua estate was as busy as a marketplace every day. Princess Consort. In the study, Yili looked up at Director Mo at the door and asked, "Who wants to see you?" Director Mo said in a low voice, "Duke Hua and Marquis Nan request an audience." Marquis Nan's heir went missing in the chaos. Missing? How could? Yili frowned. She somewhat understood why Duke Hua and Marquis Nan were here. However, this was truly a bit difficult for her. Sighing softly, Yili said, "Invite Duke Hua and Marquis Nan in." Not long after, Duke Hua and Marquis Nan arrived at the door. Yili personally stood up to welcome them. She stopped the two who were about to bow and said, "There are no outsiders here, so there's no need for formalities. Old Duke, Marquis, please have a seat." The two thanked her and sat down. The maidservant served tea. Yili asked, "Old Duke and Marquis Nan came together. Is it because of the border?" Marquis Nan looked haggard. He let out a long sigh and said, "I'm sorry to have disturbed Princess." Yili shook her head and said, "Shitzi and I are not outsiders. Marquis need not worry. This consort will immediately order people to search for the heir at the border." Marquis Nan shook his head and sighed, "My son is loyal to the country. Then, everything will be settled. What do you think, Princess Consort?" Yili said with a bitter smile, "Old Duke, are you so sure that Yili can mobilize the Mahist army?" Duke Hua raised his white eyebrows and looked askance at Yili, "Then can Princess Consort do it?" "If Princess Consort says no, this old man will get up and leave." Yili was silent for a while. Then, she raised her head and said, "The military power cannot be given to Old Duke. It's not that Yili doesn't trust Old Duke, but even if Old Duke is given the army tally, I'm afraid it won't be easy to mobilize." A trace of disappointment flashed across Duke Hua's and Marquis Nan's eyes. However, they heard Yili lightly say, "Yili will accompany you to the border. It's just that the old Duke is already old and I'm afraid that he won't be able to travel long distances." Marquis Nan said happily, "If Princess trusts me, I will immediately request the Emperor to lead the troops to battle. No, I can also take the position of Deputy General and leave the position of Commander-in-Chief until Prince Ding returns." Duke Hua looked at Yili with slight shock. His eyes were full of praise. He nodded and said, "Good, Xiaoyao really has good eyes. I'll have to trouble Princess Consort this time." Yili shook her head and said with a smile, "Old Duke, don't be happy too early. No matter how good our plans are, the Emperor may not unify." Duke Hua said in a heavy voice, "If the Emperor is truly the ruler of a country, he will naturally agree." Hearing this, Marquis Nan stilled. He looked outside the study and said in a low voice, "Old Duke, you can't say this." After sending off Duke Hua and Marquis Nan, Yili returned to the study and saw Feng Zhiao standing under the bookshelf with his head down as he flipped through a book. Hearing her footsteps, he turned his head and said worriedly, "Did Princess Consort really agree to Old Duke and Marquis Nan going to the border?" "You heard?" Yili smiled faintly. She walked back to sit behind the desk and said, "Shi Ling is coming aggressively. It is impossible for the Mahist army to stay out of this, even if the prince is not here. Perhaps people can understand why I am not giving them military power right now. However, once the war situation worsens, no reason will work. Everyone in the world will only see the Dechu state being trampled by foreign tribes. The Mahist army will turn a deaf ear to this. Also, since we will have to send troops sooner or later, the earlier we enter the battlefield, the earlier we can control the situation. Besides, even if I agree, that person in the palace may not agree. Although the people far away in the capital could not see the carnage, the number of cities lost and the number of casualties was still shocking. There were more and more people in the capital requesting the Prince Ding mansion to send out troops. The people were already used to the fact that there would always be a black army protecting their safety at all times. But this time, the war had already started for almost a month, but there was still no news of the Ding Palace and the Mo family army. This made many commoners and even the high-ranking officials and dignitaries feel uneasy. The hearts of the people in the capital were uneasy. When the news that Prince Ding was far away in the northern tribes and that the Princess Ding mansion would take his place to go to war was rejected by the emperor, the court was silent. However, the commoners gradually began to discuss it. They were naturally dissatisfied with the emperor's decision, but at this time, Mo Jingqi didn't have the courage to suppress the discussions. This caused the commoners in the capital to send in a flood of letters, almost drowning half of the imperial study. 3 days later, Mo Jingqi finally announced in the morning court with a black face that Marquis Nan would be the deputy general and that the Princess Ding mansion would accompany the army to go to war against the Xiling invasion. Receiving the decree, Yili pursed her lips inwardly and turned to return to her room to prepare. The news that the Mahist army was about to go to war caused the entire capital to be excited. It was as though as long as the Mahist army went out, the Xiling army would be defeated like a landslide. Yili saw this and couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Mo Xiuyao was right. For so many years, the power of the Prince Ding mansion had directly caused the Dechu state to have fewer famous generals. Once something happened to the Prince Ding mansion, the Dechu state's situation was truly worrying. Of the 800,000 Mahist army stationed near the capital, only 50,000 men led by General Zhang Qilan were stationed there. These 50,000 men were said to be used to protect the capital, so they couldn't follow Yili's army to the border. Yili and Marquis Nan needed to bring people to a place a few hundred li away from the capital to meet up with the troops stationed there. Then, they could rush to the border. This also eliminated the need for a send-off and swearing ceremony. It just so happened that Yili didn't like this kind of pretentious display and was naturally satisfied with this somewhat sloppy arrangement. Most of the people from the Prince Ding mansion still had to stay in the capital to guard their respective duties. Only Feng Zhiyao and Zhuo Jing accompanied Yili to the battlefield, as well as Yun Ting who had been thrown into the military camp for quite some time, and Su Qingze who had somehow managed to convince Mo Jingqi. Because Su Qingze insisted on going to the border, Yili felt very guilty towards Qin Zheng, whom she hadn't seen for quite some time. On the contrary, Qin Zheng, who had come to send them off, smiled understandingly at Yili and reminded them to be careful on the road and to return soon. In addition, for some reason, Mo Jingqi stuffed Mu Yang with them before leaving. Mo Jingqi said that Prince Ding's return was uncertain and that Marquis Nan was getting old, so he sent Mu Yang to be Nan Ho's errand boy. Yili and Marquis Nan didn't say much about this. Everyone was well aware of why Mo Jingqi sent Mu Yang with them. Although Mu Yang was a young talent, the others weren't to be trifled with. No one could predict what would happen on the battlefield. They didn't have to fall out with the emperor over such a small matter. The group galloped on their horses. In just a little more than a day, they arrived at the military town of Hengshui, which was located 500 li away from the Chu capital. Hengshui city wasn't prosperous and grand, but there were nearly 100,000 Mahist armies stationed 20 li to the west of the city. Troops stationed in other places were also rushing in this direction. In the next few days, nearly 300,000 soldiers would gather here. By the time they arrived at Hengshui city, it was already sunset. Yili reined in her horse and turned back to say to Marquis Nan, Marquis, General's son, brought people to Heng Shui last night. Let's not enter the city and go directly to the Heng Shui camp. Marquis Nan looked approvingly at Yi Li, who was sitting upright on the horse, and said, "Let's do as Princess says." After galloping for a day and night, even an ordinary man wouldn't be able to bear it. Princess Ding, however, was still calm and composed. There wasn't even a trace of fatigue on her face. This caused Marquis Nan and Mu Yang to be both surprised and impressed. The Heng Shui camp was located at the foot of a mountain 20 li to the west of Heng Shui city. In front of them was an endless plain, and behind them was the Heng Shui mountain range. It was a natural training ground. When the group was still 5 or 6 li away from the Heng Shui camp, the local general stationed there and General Sun Yan, who had arrived early last night, came to greet them. "This general greets Princess." Yi Li nodded slightly and asked, "Where is the Heng Shui camp's commanding general?" A middle-aged man with white hair and beard stepped out. He was already 40 or 50 years old but was still in high spirits. He cupped his hands to Yi Li and said, "This General Lu Jingxian, the commanding general of the Heng Shui camp, greets Princess." Chapter 311. Yi Li dismounted her horse and raised her hand. "General Lu, there's no need to be so courteous. This is the vice commander of the Western Expedition, Marquis Nan. This is Marquis Muyang's heir, Lieutenant Muyang." Yi Li didn't introduce Zhuo Jing, Yun Ting, and the others standing behind her. The generals understood that they were on the same side and only went forward to greet Marquis Nan and Muyang. Marquis Nan was someone who had been on the battlefield and naturally didn't care about the trifles in front of these generals. He very straightforwardly greeted everyone. As for Muyang, although he had the status of Marquis Muyang's heir, his position in the army was only a lieutenant. Any of the generals present had a higher position than him. Naturally, there wasn't much room for him to speak. He just followed Marquis Nan and exchanged a few words with everyone. Fortunately, although Mu Yang grew up smoothly, he didn't develop the bad habit of being arrogant. The scene could be considered harmonious and cheerful. After the greetings, Marquis Nan asked seriously, "General Lu, is the army ready to depart?" Lu Jingxian didn't hesitate and said clearly, "The army is ready to depart. As long as Wang Fei and Marquis Yi give the order, we can depart at any time." Feng Zhiyao smiled, "General Lu, we are really tired from the journey. Let's depart tomorrow morning." Lu Jingxian looked at everyone and said with a smile, "General Feng is right. This old man didn't think it through. Wang Fei, Marquis Yi, please return to the camp to rest for the night. It will also allow the soldiers to conserve their energy." In the vast camp, it was already quiet at night. They were going to depart early tomorrow morning, so most of the soldiers went to bed early. Of course, this didn't include the generals who were sitting in the tent discussing matters. In the tent, Yi Li changed into a light blue robe and sat in the main seat in the center. Below her sat Feng Zhiyao, Lu Jingxian, Sun Yan, and the other generals according to their ranks. As for the deputy commanders, Nan Ho and Mu Yang, they had already been invited to rest after the discussion. This was the first time that all the generals had seen Yi Li, the mistress of the Ding King's residence. Rather than saying that they respected Yi Li's identity as Princess Ding, they respected the jade pendant on her waist. A general stood up and said, "Wang Fei, when will the prince be able to return?" Wang Fei only had the status of supervising the troops. As the deputy commander, Marquis Nan was the person with the highest authority in the Mahist army. Although Marquis Nan had always been neutral, it still made these generals who were loyal to the Prince Ding mansion feel uneasy. Yi Li shook her head lightly and said, "The prince is far away in the northern tribes. He will need some time to rush back after receiving the news. But now, the war at the border could not wait for Prince's return. Or, if the prince is not here, the generals will not fight?" All the generals were stunned. Yi Li continued, I understand everyone's loyalty to the Prince Ding mansion and the prince. However, this consort also hopes that all of you can understand one thing. What exactly does the Mo family army exist for? Her clear and beautiful eyes lightly swept over everyone. It is for the peace of the people of Great Chu. Every Mahist army soldier also has parents and children. Protecting the Chu state is protecting the Mahist army's own family. Everyone was silent. Lu Jingxian said with some hesitation, "Do we really have to listen to Marquis Nan's command?" Yi Li said, "If Marquis Nan and the Mahist army have the same goal, why can't we temporarily listen to his command? The prince cannot rush back now. This is reality. Can we tell the West Hill people that Prince Ding is not here and that we will fight again in a few days?" Hearing this, everyone's expressions couldn't help but twist. Feng Zhiyao smiled and said, "Wang Fei, I think everyone is worried that if the Mahist army listens to Marquis Nan's command, will it be disadvantageous to us if he obtains the military power of the Mahist army?" Yi Li raised her eyebrows and smiled. "Marquis Nan will not obtain the military power of the Mahist army. I will follow Marquis Nan at any time. Even so, there are some disadvantages. But right now, this is the only way." Speaking of which, Marquis Nan is temporarily acting as the commander-in-chief. He cannot personally attend every battle. So, I will have to trouble the generals on the battlefield. Everyone said in unison, "We will not disappoint Wang Fei." Yi Li nodded and said, "I will have to trouble the generals. How much do you know about the situation at the front?" As soon as she said this, the tent immediately fell silent. Although they had a grudge against the people sent by the emperor, it was also because the emperor had spared no effort to suppress the Mahist army these past few years. Originally, the Mahist army was scattered to guard the various borders of the Chu state. However, because Mo Jingqi was worried, he took advantage of the time when Prince Ding was recuperating in the mansion and the Mahist army was greatly weakened to transfer all the Mahist army inland. Almost all the soldiers stationed at the borders were the emperor's trusted aides or generals who didn't get along well with the Prince Ding mansion. And now, West Hill had invaded the Chu state. They were also invading the land that they had protected for generations. How could they not be anxious? Lu Jingxian said in a low voice, "This time, West Hill came prepared." Genom of Gojoseon personally led 300,000 soldiers to invade the border. According to the news from the front, there are several 100,000 soldiers surrounding Xinyang. The soldiers sent by the imperial court have found Genom of Gojoseon and lost more than half of their ambush. In the past few days, we've discussed this. I'm afraid that Xinyang city will not be able to be defended. Everyone's expressions were ugly. Xinyang was the granary of the northwest. Once Xinyang was lost, not only would they lose a city and a pond, but the food of the people and even the army would also be threatened. Yi Li thought for a moment, then asked, "Based on the speed of our march, what is the worst that can happen?" Lu Jingxian said, "The Xiling army will cross Xinyang and occupy the entire Qingzhou. Then they will enter the palace and enter Hanzhou's Jiangxia town." Yi Li raised her brows. Lu Jingxian explained, "There are 50,000 of our soldiers stationed near Jiangxia. The main commander, General Yuan Pei, is also a veteran of the battlefield. Right now, he should have gone to reinforce Xinyang. Once Xinyang is lost, he should lead the troops to retreat to Jiangxia. If we continue on our way, we should be able to reinforce Jiangxia in time." Yi Li nodded. She had analyzed this with Feng Zhiyao before, and the conclusion was similar to Lu Jingxian's. Yi Li rubbed her forehead and asked, "You only talked about the situation of the middle army of West Hill. What about the south and north?" Lu Jingxian said, "The south and north have at least 150,000 soldiers each. They are attacking Jiayi Pass in the south and Tianyun Pass in the north. Although the border guards are doing their best to resist, I'm afraid that the situation is not optimistic." "Who is leading the south and north?" Lu Jingxian shook his head. Sun Yan said, "Princess, it is said that the south is led by Lei Tengfeng, Crown Prince of Genom of Gojoseon. This person has been taught by Genom of Gojoseon since he was young. When he was 19 years old, he fought against the northern tribes on the battlefield. He is not to be underestimated. The commander of the north is a veteran of West Hill, Shengguanyi. This person does not have any great achievements, and he is over 60 years old. But, he is the teacher of Genom of Gojoseon in West Hill. Yi Li nodded. After thinking for a long time, she raised her head and said, "Thank you for your hard work today. We will depart early tomorrow morning. Everyone should go back and rest." Everyone stood up and bid farewell to Yi Li, then turned and left. Only Feng Zhiyao, Zhuo Jing and Su Qingze were left in the tent. Feng Zhiyao smiled as he looked at Yi Li's deeply furrowed brows and said, "West Hill is coming aggressively. Does Princess have a headache?" Yi Li smiled bitterly and said, "How can I not have a headache? She was not a peerless genius. Frankly speaking, she did not have the energy for such a large-scale war. If it was a small group of special operations, she was confident that she could look down on the world. But when it came to mobilizing troops and giving advice, even though she had received a lot of advice from Mo Xiuyao, she still could not help but feel a little weak at the beginning. Chapter 312. Feng Zhiyao said, "I'm sure that West Hill sent at least 600,000 soldiers this time. With so many soldiers and the reputation of West Hill Genom of Gojoseon as the god of war, not to mention you, princess consort, even those veterans on the battlefield are worried." Although West Hill Genom of Gojoseon had been defeated by Mo Lufang, the prince regent of Dechu state, Mo Lufang was dead and he was still alive. "Li, you did well." Su Qingze looked at Yi Li and said lightly. His usually cold eyes were filled with a touch of warmth. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Second brother, don't praise me. I may look calm on the surface, but my heart is in a mess." Su Qingze said, "Don't be too nervous. Just do what you can. If there's anything you want me to do, just ask." Yi Li nodded, "Thank you, second brother." At this time, Mo Xiuyao, who was far away in the northern tribes, felt cold in his heart. Looking up at the bright moon in the sky, he couldn't help but think of the past year. Since the accident, he had never thought that his life would be so comfortable and happy. At first, they were like family and friends, then they helped each other hand in hand, and then they were deeply attached to each other. He didn't know when, but Li's every frown and smile had been engraved in his heart, and it would be difficult to remove in this life. "Prince." A shadow guard quietly appeared behind him. "What's the news?" The shadow guard said, "The list of the people behind the assassination of Princess Consort has been investigated. And since West Hill's invasion, the Emperor has summoned Princess Consort to the palace several times. It seems that he wants to take the military power of the Mahist army from Princess Consort. But he hasn't succeeded." Mo Xiuyao's eyes were dark. He sneered and said, "He can never tell what's important and what's urgent. Go and tell Ronghua that no matter what, we must leave tomorrow." The shadow guard hesitated for a moment and said, "I'm afraid that Princess Ronghua does not have such a deep influence on Yeluhong." Mo Xiuyao said nonchalantly, "If Yeluhong wants to defeat Yeluyi, he naturally knows what to do. Go and prepare. We'll set off tomorrow." The shadow guard nodded, this subordinate obeys. Dismissing the guards, Mo Xiuyao raised his head to look at the bright moon in the sky, his gaze gradually becoming gentle. Li. Xiuyao always makes you suffer. One day, I will deliver the best in the world to you. As for those who want to hurt you, I will never let them off." Originally, Mo Xiuyao should have returned to the capital the moment he heard the news of West Hill's invasion. However, the king of the northern tribe's attitude was unusually firm. He insisted that Mo Xiuyao stay and attend the crown prince's wedding. He even faintly threatened him. Mo Xiuyao was not afraid of his threats. However, if he really left on the spot, the Dachu state would very likely have to face the attack of two countries at the same time. The king of the northern tribes was not ready to annex the Dachu state yet. However, he did not mind at all delaying Mo Xiuyao, the young god of war, for a period of time for West Hill. Perhaps he could even gain some benefits from it. Therefore, he also deserved to die. 10 li outside of Xinyang city, West Hill's hundreds of thousands of soldiers and horses were eyeing the city not far away. That city was more attractive and meaningful than a mere border city. There were countless provisions and military supplies. It was the richest and most prosperous city in the northwest. That city would become their first real step in conquering the Dachu state. In the commander-in-chief's tent, Genom of Gojoseon, who was almost 50 years old, was sitting behind a desk. He held the memorial that his subordinate had just sent to him with one hand and looked at it for a while. Suddenly, he laughed wildly. The generals below looked at each other in dismay. They did not know what had made the prince so happy. When he had finished laughing, he said loudly, "Mo Lufang. You also have a day like this. If you were to see your Ding royal estate in this state, would you regret it?" The generals all exchanged glances. The person standing at the front stepped forward and asked, "Prince, is there any good news?" Genom of Gojoseon casually handed over the memorial and said to everyone with a smile, "The Ding royal estate really does not have a successor. A woman is actually in charge of military power." The general who saw the memorial had a strange expression on his face. He said, "Deputy Marquis Nanho, the Ding royal consort is supervising the army? What does Dong Chu mean by this?" Genom of Gojoseon lightly snorted and said, "We have no choice. I have also heard of Marquis Nanho. He has always been neutral and does not concern himself with worldly affairs. It's fine if he is a talented general. However, he does not have the ability to lead the Mahist army. Moreover, the military power of the Mahist army is not that easy to obtain. Could it be that the Mahist army is currently in the hands of the Ding royal consort?" The general said in shock. Genom of Gojoseon nodded and smiled thoughtfully, "That's right. Mo Xiuyao is far away in the northern tribes and cannot rush back. Without Mo Xiuyao, the Ding royal estate does not have anyone who can lead the army. Now, the military power has fallen into the hands of a 16 or 17-year-old girl." The generals below the tent could not help but become excited. They all whispered to each other for a while. Someone stepped forward and said, "Since it is like this, Prince, we can take this opportunity to take care of the Mahist army. This will prevent them from reuniting with Prince Ding and causing trouble for our expedition to Eastern Chu." Genom of Gojoseon slightly narrowed his eyes. His right hand carelessly stroked his empty left sleeve as he said, "Although I want to fight with Mo Xiuyao, but, as a general, we must not fight based on personal feelings. This time, it is indeed the best opportunity that the heavens have given us. If we can destroy this army, the Ding royal estate will not be able to achieve anything. We will listen to Prince's orders." Everyone said in unison. The idea of destroying the Ding royal estate made everyone's hearts become faintly excited. Genom of Gojoseon nodded in satisfaction, "Very good. Speed up the attack on Xinyang. We must take Xinyang city within 3 days. Then head to Jiangxia and wipe out the Mahist army in one fell swoop." "As you command." Reporting to Wang Fei, a letter has arrived on the second day. In the Mahist army's barracks, Yili was sitting in a large tent. She was discussing matters with Marquis Nan and the others while the entire army was stationed. Shuo Jing came in holding a letter. Yili did not even raise her head as she lightly said, "Translate it for me." Shuo Jing nodded and walked to the desk in the corner of the tent to translate the letter. Yili continued to speak to Marquis Nan, "It will take at least 7 days for us to reach Jiangxia. I'm afraid that it will be difficult to speed up the army," as Marquis Nan said. Marquis Nan frowned and said, "Why is that? The Mahist army has always moved quickly. I remember that at their fastest, they could travel hundreds of li in a day. Yili shook her head and said, Marquis Nan, that was a small army. We have an army of nearly 300,000. The journey that should have taken 10 days has been shortened to 5 days. Do you think that even if we really reach the border, these 300,000 soldiers will still have the strength to fight? I'm afraid that the West Hill people will not give us time to rest. Once we reach Jiangxia, what awaits us will only be a fierce battle. Marquis Nan sighed heavily. How could I not know what Wang Fei is talking about? It's just that I am really worried about Xinyang. Yili shook her head and said in a low voice, Xinyang cannot be protected. With Marquis Nan's ability, how many days can you defend Xinyang against the Genom kingdom of Gojoseon? Marquis Nan thought for a moment and said, Xinyang city does not lack military supplies. If it were me, I could defend it for a month. Yili said, General Leng can defend it for half a month. Marquis Nan, do you know how many days it has been today? Even if we grew wings, we would not be able to reach Xinyang in time. Furthermore, Xinyang city does not lack anything. Xinyang city lacks water. Chapter 313. Everyone's expression changed slightly. If they were short on food, they could barely survive for a few days. But if they were short on water, there was nothing much to say. Xinyang was located in the northwest and had a shortage of water. After being besieged by Xiling, it was almost certain that they would be short of water. No matter how fast we go, Genom of Gojoseon will definitely be waiting for us in Jiangxia. Yili sighed. Mu Yang frowned and asked, what if Jiangxia is also breached? Lu Jingxian raised his eyebrows and said, don't worry, Prince Mu. Although Jiangxia's defending general, General Yuan Pei, only has tens of thousands of troops, Jiangxia is completely different from Xinyang. It won't be a problem to defend for 10 days to half a month. Even if Genom of Gojoseon really has a large army, as long as Jiangxia has a single soldier, they won't let the Xiling people take half a step in. Hearing this, Marquis Nan and Mu Yang couldn't help but blush. The Mahist army had guarded the border for hundreds of years and had never let the enemy take a step into the Chu state. But now, because the emperor was afraid that the Prince Ding mansion had left the Mahist army idle, the Xiling army had already taken several cities and advanced 300 to 400 li in less than a month after the war started. Marquis Nan nodded and said, it's good that Princess knows. Yili smiled faintly and said, I know that Marquis Nan is also worried about the war. Rest assured, Marquis Nan, General Sun Yan has already sent the Black Cloud Cavalry to Jiangxia. Princess. Zhuo Jing had already finished translating the letter and came over to deliver it to Yili. Yili lowered her head and read for a while. She frowned and handed the letter to Marquis Nan. Marquis Nan, what do the generals think? Marquis Nan glanced at it and was surprised to see Zhuo Jing standing beside Yili with a calm expression. He frowned and said, Genom of Gojoseon suddenly increased the speed of their attack. Could it be that they want to take Jiangxia before we arrive? No. Princess Consort, I'm afraid something bad has happened. When Lu Jingxian and Feng Zhiyao saw Marquis Nan's expression change, they hurriedly took the letter and read it together. The more they read, the deeper their frowns became. Genom of Gojoseon sent people to attack Xinyang, but at the same time, he split up his troops to take a roundabout route. Even the South Army, which was not far from them, had sent a team to the north. Princess. Feng Zhiyao frowned. Marquis Nan said in a low voice, Genom of Gojoseon is attacking Xinyang fiercely while diverting troops to take a detour. I'm afraid he wants to cut off General Yuan's escape route. Yili frowned deeply. After a while, she said, bring me the map. At this time, the problem of not having a smooth flow of information was manifested. No matter what they analyzed now, they could not immediately pass it on to the generals at the front. They could only hope that the generals at the front also saw the other party's intentions and made the necessary response. Fortunately, this kind of problem was often mutual. Zhuo Jing turned around and took out a folded piece of paper from behind him. He slowly unfolded it. On the paper, there were winding lines marked with mountains and rivers. The border of Dechu State, from south to north, was clear at a glance. Yili picked up the pen on the table and marked out the routes of the Shilin troops mentioned in the letter. She frowned and raised her head to ask, "Has the detailed map of the northwest been sent back?" Zhuo Jing turned around and took out another one from his luggage. "It arrived this morning. I was just about to show it to Princess Consort." Yili cleared the table and spread out the map. She said, "What's the use of showing it to me? I've never been to the northwest. Marquis, General Liu, come and take a look." Everyone had been curious about the map in front of them for a long time. Hearing Yi Li's words, they immediately gathered around. There were two maps of about the same size on the table. One was clearly a map of all the border areas to the west of Dechu State. The other was much more detailed, but only the northwest. They had never seen it in detail before. Lu Jingxian praised, "Good stuff. This general has been at the northwest border since I was 20 years old. Even after 20 years, I don't dare say I know more than this map." Marquis Nan nodded and pointed at a place on the map. "General Liu is right. This marquis has been to the northwest a few times in the past. Princess Consort's map is very detailed." Yi Li smiled in satisfaction. How could it not be detailed? This group of people who had just been trained had all been sent out. Adding on the original maps, if they were still not familiar with the northwest, then they had learned for nothing. Yi Li stared at the two maps for a long time. She picked up the pen and drew a line on the map. She said in a deep voice, "Immediately send orders to the troops in the south. All troops near Shiling's southern army to gather in the west. Intercept the troops from the southern army." Zhuo Jing nodded in acknowledgement. Yi Li raised an eyebrow in thought and then smiled faintly. She lowered her head and took out a piece of paper. She wrote a line of characters on the paper and handed it to Zhuo Jing. She asked, "Where is Qin Feng?" Zhuo Jing lowered his head and thought for a while. He said, "Near the Ling Pass. He should be preparing to come up north to meet with us." Yi Li lowered her head to look at the location of the Ling Pass. She said, "Tell him not to come back. Give this to him." The next step of the plan. Zhuo Jing put away the paper and walked out without looking at it. "Does Princess Consort have a plan?" Mu Yang asked with raised eyebrows. Yi Li smiled faintly. "It can't be considered a plan. I'm just making some arrangements in advance. Just in case." Knowing that she had no intention of explaining, Mu Yang only looked at her with a complicated gaze and did not pursue the matter. The Mahist army had listened to the orders of the Ding King for 100 years. In recent years, they did not have a good impression of the emperor. As someone who was sent here by the emperor, his status was naturally awkward. Fortunately, Mu Yang was also a very tactful person. Marquis Nan looked at Yi Li and then at Mu Yang as if he did not notice the undercurrent between the two of them. He stroked his beard and said with a smile, "It's good that Princess Consort has a plan. We're hundreds of miles away now, so there's nothing we can do. It's better to rush to the battlefield to provide support as soon as possible." Yi Li and Mu Yang both nodded in agreement. Only then did Marquis Nan smile and discuss with Yi Li and the others for a while before getting up to leave and return to his tent to rest. After Marquis Nan left, Mu Yang had no choice but to get up and leave even if he wanted to stay and continue listening to everyone's reply. Xinyang City. On the city wall, Lin Qingyu looked at the billowing flags in the distance with a dark expression. Xinyang had been surrounded by the army for more than 10 days. If they still could not get out of the siege, even if the Shilin army did not break through, it would soon collapse from the inside. In addition, more than half of the reinforcements who had just arrived at the border had been injured. As the deputy general, Marquis Nan's heir had gone missing on the battlefield, which made the morale of the soldiers guarding the city even lower. If the general of Xinyang City had not died in battle and there was no one to preside over the overall situation, it was unknown whether he would still be standing on the city wall. General Leng, when will the reinforcements from the imperial court arrive? A tired-looking general hurried over and asked Leng Qingyu rudely. These soldiers were originally very dissatisfied with this general who had become the commander-in-chief of an army at such a young age. Moreover, he had been beaten into a sorry state by Shiling's Genom of Gojoseon before arriving, which made them look down on him even more. Moreover, he was the son of the Defender General of the state and was personally conferred the title of Great General by the Emperor. After the general of Xinyang City died in battle, he was the highest commander in Xinyang City. Although everyone was respectful on the surface, no one knew what they were thinking. As for the high-ranking generals of Xinyang City, they did not even bother to put on an act. A trace of embarrassment and anger flashed across Leng Qingyu's cold face. His life had been smooth since he was young and he became the commander of the Imperial Guards with his own ability. He was one of the top young talents in the Chu capital. However, he kept running into a wall. His originally confident heart couldn't help but become hesitant and doubtful. Chapter 314. Frowning, Leng Qingyu said, "They will naturally arrive when it's time. Just wait patiently, General." The man's face darkened. This general can wait, but Suncreed City can't. General Leng, look at the city below and inside. How many more days do you think Suncreed City can hold on? Shut up. Leng Qingyu roared, his gaze shooting at the person in front of him like an arrow. He said coldly, Suncreed City won't fall. That person was startled by the murderous look in his eyes. He turned around and snorted, since General Leng has such confidence, this general will wait and see. After saying that, he flicked his sleeves and turned around to leave quickly. Seeing the other party leave without hesitation, Leng Qingyu's gaze became even more malicious. But when he turned back to look at the endless enemy army in the distance, he could only forcibly suppress them. Suddenly, the sound of drums below the city shook the heavens. Leng Qingyu looked into the distance in shock. The originally motionless banners began to move. Taking a deep breath, Leng Qingyu raised his voice and said, "Defend the city." Once again, the two armies engaged in a fierce battle above and below the city walls. On the other hand, the defenders were clearly showing signs of exhaustion and weakness, which made the soldiers below the city even more excited as they charged forward. In a certain tall building in Suncreed City, deafening battle cries could be heard from the city gates outside the slanted window. Inside the window, an ordinary-looking man said in a low voice, "Suncreed City can't be defended anymore. Get ready. We're withdrawing." Another man frowned. "Should we ask General Yuan to support them from the outside? The princess consort and the reinforcements are already halfway there." The man shook his head. "It's useless. Haven't you noticed that the Shiling army's attacks have been much fiercer these past 2 days? Genom of Gojoseon is probably going to take Suncreed City at all costs. Leng Qingyu can't suppress the soldiers of Suncreed City. Even if General Yuan has been harassing them from the outside, he won't be able to delay them for long. It's very likely that General Yuan and the others will be trapped as well. All right. Immediately send a message to ask General Yuan to leave the battlefield and return to Jiangxia. You guys go first. I'll stay behind to handle matters in Suncreed City." "All right. Be careful." After sending off his companion, the man turned and went downstairs to the official's residence of Suncreed City. In the West Hill military camp, Genom of Gojoseon sat in a comfortable chair with a calm expression on his face. He supported his chin with one hand and closed his eyes to rest while waiting for news from outside. There would definitely be news of Suncreed City's fall by today. Although that kid in Suncreed City had some ability, he was still too inexperienced. Under such circumstances, he would be powerless to turn the tide. As soon as he thought of the countless grains, cloth, gold, and silver in Suncreed City becoming the resources he would use to attack the Dachu state in the future, his mood couldn't be described with words. How are the preparations on Yuan Pei's side? Remembering something, Genom of Gojoseon opened his eyes and asked. The high-ranking officer who was also sitting down and waiting for the news immediately stood up and said, following Prince's instructions, our army has already secretly planned a way to return to Jiangxia. Although we can't find Yuan Pei's men for the time being, once Xinyang falls, he will inevitably return to Jiangxia. At that time, we won't have to worry about not being able to catch him. Genom of Gojoseon nodded in satisfaction. Very good. Outside the tent, the sound of a retreat was heard. Genom of Gojoseon's smile deepened. He stood up and said with a smile, Xinyang has fallen. All the high-ranking officers' faces were filled with joy. Congratulations, Prince. Genom of Gojoseon shook his head. No, congratulations to all of us. With Xinyang, we will be invincible in our attack on the Dachu state. This time, the heavens are indeed protecting Xiling. All the high-ranking officers chanted in unison, the heavens are protecting Xiling. Outside the tent, the hurried footsteps of a messenger soldier could be heard. Reporting to Prince, Suncreed City has fallen. Very good. What about the kid guarding the city? Genom of Gojoseon asked. The messenger soldier hesitated for a moment before saying, we haven't found Xinyang's commanding general, Leng Qingyu. Hearing this, Genom of Gojoseon couldn't help but frown. He waved his hand and said, go investigate again. Immediately send back any news. Yes. 2 hours later, the soldiers who had gone to attack the city had all returned to camp. The tent was filled with jubilation. Only Genom of Gojoseon frowned. Seeing this, his subordinates couldn't help but ask, Prince, is there something wrong? Genom of Gojoseon shook his head. I don't know. I keep feeling that something isn't right. Reporting to Prince, something bad has happened. Outside the tent, someone loudly requested an audience. Genom of Gojoseon's heart sank. He said coldly, come in. What happened to Suncreed City? The person said, reporting to Prince, there should have been less than 20% of the provisions in Suncreed City. What? Everyone was shocked. Could it be that the East Chu people knew that they would lose and moved the provisions in advance? Impossible. After Suncreed was surrounded, even a mosquito couldn't fly out, let alone so much provisions. Genom of Gojoseon's face was gloomy. He asked in a low voice, is there anything else? The soldier looked at Genom of Gojoseon's expression and said in a trembling voice, there's also the silver in Suncreed City's treasury.